Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the descendant of Medusa? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Stone Blood, Leaf Heart. Lanterns bobbed along the river like slow constellations, their light doubling on the water and turning the whole festival into a sky you could walk through. Drums thumped. Children with paper snakes chased each other between stalls. Naruto bought a skewer of something glazed and peppered and pretended not to stare at the way smoke curled up and caught under the lantern rims. He liked nights like this, when people forgot to be careful. Uzumaki. A vendor barked, shaking a tin. You going to pay for that or charm me with your smile? Naruto grinned anyway and tossed the coins. The glaze ran down his fingers in streaks. He didn't see the first silver line drop. It looked like a stray hair in the lantern light, and then there were three, and then a grid knitting itself between poles and awnings high above the street. People noticed when the drums wavered, the beat falling off like the music was embarrassed. Someone laughed too loud to stave off the wrong kind of noise. A child looking up reached to touch the pretty wire. The wire bit him. He didn't cry, just jerked back with a gulp that was worse. Naruto had the skewer in his mouth and his free hand braced without thinking. The top beam of the nearest stall groaned. He was under it before he decided to move, shoulders set, feet spread, breath steady like Iruka had tacked it into him. The wood split anyway. Naruto felt the crack open under his palm like a zipper ripping through a coat. He put his other hand on the seam. Stop, he told it. His chakra flooded, hot and wrong and sweet, the way a risky gamble tastes at the back of the teeth. The split slowed. Fibers prickled under his skin. Wood grain lifted from brown to a dull, chalky sheen, and then it wasn't wood grain anymore, it was mineral grain, tiny facets catching lantern light. Whoa, the vendor whispered. Naruto realized he was clamping the beam into hole by cladding it in stone. He let go before it ran too far. The stall held. The chalky skin bled back into wood with a wheeze. Like someone had breathed out against his palms. His fingers shook. He hid that by wiping the glaze on his pants. Apologies for the scare, he said, like he did this every day and was bored by it. His mouth tasted like iron and sugar. Yon of the lantern swung wide and clipped a silver thread. Sparks fell and fizzed on the cobbles. From the rooftops, masked figures dropped into the rafters and the walk smoke and the wind of movement. It wasn't a great ninja entrance. It was careful. They wanted the angle. They wanted the light. Hinata, Naruto said without turning. He didn't know where she was. He only knew that of all the eyes in Konoha, hers saw the most that people missed. I'm here, she said, low at his shoulder, not having to raise her voice to get through the noise. He cog. A flash of pale eyes as the Byakugan bloomed, a flicker of blue veins around their edges. Those threads, light-based chakra, reflective amplifiers. Don't look into them. They'll return whatever you send, doubled. Fun. Naruto watched a masked operative tug a wire taut between two lantern poles, spreading a lattice across the breadth of the street. Civilians were already pressing into the ink of the alleyways, shepherded by two more figures with rods that hummed like tuning forks. The rods tipped mirror black. You see their pattern. Hinata didn't answer at first. He felt her attention move. The way a breeze runs fingers through a field. They're funneling people toward the river's bend. Someone set a convex mirror there. If you push chakra in the wrong arc, it'll. Got it. Naruto bit through the last of the skewer and tossed the stick. The move was not dramatic. He didn't leap. He walked like he owned the street and the road had just remembered the agreement. Two masked operatives jumped to meet him. Their weapons were unusual. Flat blades with one dull edge, slick like they were dipped in oil. He could see himself in them in a chopped-up way. A sliver of blonde, a slice of orange. He looked at their wrists instead. The first came in centerline. Naruto stepped left, heel grinding grit, and felt a wire sing by his ear. He didn't look toward the sound. He dipped his head so his hair fell forward and something in that motion changed the way his chakra sat on his skin. It spread through his scalp like a spill, like his hair drinking in the lantern heat. Strands thickened, and a dozen fine Black threads lifted weightlessly and eased out beyond his shoulders. They weren't visible to anyone not staring. He laid those unseen threads along the stones and the tall legs and the wire lattice overhead and the breath of the man in front of him. They hummed. He closed his eyes. Cute, the second masked operative said, the word flattened by cloth. Blind, sure. Naruto smiled with his mouth shut. The threads told him what the eyes wanted to trick from him. The first blade cut, but the man had a weak wrist. Naruto felt the buckle in the hilt before the motion was fully made. He leaned into it, caught the weak point, and sent the hum of his chakra through the blade like rain through a gutter. The blade warmed. The man pulled back too late. A pale frost bloomed along his forearm. Granules lifting like gooseflesh into grit. Pressure points, Hinata murmured, precise. 3 degrees lower. Don't petrify the artery. Naruto adjusted. The frost crept around the operative's wrist like a bracer, locking bones without sealing veins. The man gasped, not in pain, more like shock at the sudden wrongness of his own skin. The second came hard at his back. Naruto's threads had marked the angle. But he couldn't stop both without risking flare. He didn't have to. A kunai wickered down from the roof and knocked the oil-dipped blade aside with a flat smack. Hey there, festival crashers. Enko Mitarashi called, dropping into the street like a falling laugh, coat open, snake tattoo peeking, grin sharp enough to be a weapon. I paid good money for fried octopus. And your little light show made me spill it. You owe me. With interest. The operative's blade twitched toward her eyes because Enko's mouth was distracting. Her hand was already around his wrist, twisting. He threw a knee. She took it on her thigh like a drunk taking a table corner and snapped his rod across her hip so it clanged off the doorframe instead of her face. The rod made a chiming at the touch, a clear bell. Enko cussed. Mirrors. Great. I hate mirrors. Always show me I need sleep. Wires tightened overhead. Lanterns bobbed lower, their oil glistening. One popped and threw flame like a spitting cat. The grid was falling into a cage. River bend, Hinata said, already moving through people, her shoulders making space without elbowing anyone. They're compressing to a focal point. Naruto took 2 steps and a breath. He didn't think about the fact that he could turn anyone to stone if he looked wrong. It wasn't helpful. He planted 1 thread to each lantern pole and gave them the lightest tug. The hum came back to him through wood grain and iron brackets and wire. He mapped the lattice. Then he grabbed the nearest pole like a friend. Give, he told it. He sent a pulse along his threads. Not hard enough to coat, but focused into the brackets. Metal skinned in sand. Sand forgets its shape when told to. The bracket melted under the pretense that it had always been powder. The pole leaned and the lattice went crooked. People stumbled. Enko barked something about, duck, or I crop your hair myself, and shoved 2 teenagers under a food cart as a down sag caught where their heads had been. Naruto slid into the new angle and cut 3 wires with his invisible hair, just so, just enough, not to reflect a thing. They made the river bend anyway. The operatives had counted what Konoha does when you push it. Konoha protects. The mirror at the bend wasn't glass. It was water held in a shape it shouldn't make, convex instead of flat, like the river itself had been taught a trick. Runes crawled beneath the surface, light hooking into angles they shouldn't. Civilians were pressed along the curve, some faces turned the wrong way to the light, some shut eyes tight like praying. The operatives backstopped the mirror with their rods, and the rods sang. Naruto understood the trap without being able to name it. If he attacked directly, the mirror would throw his own force back doubled. If he hesitated, people would get pinned until panic made them stampede and drown themselves. Close your eyes, someone whispered to a child. The child did, because children are very good at doing what we ask when they know we mean it. Naruto felt it then, not like a voice but like the memory of a voice he might have once known, down in the stone under the river. He put a hand to the cobbles and set another thread. This one thick as a tendon, straight down. It ran until it found bedrock. The thread drank the river's hum and sent it back. The mirror trembled. Don't. One operative snapped. And he threw his rod to catch Naruto's hand with a slick ringing rap. Pain jumped up Naruto's forearm and tried to coil there. He kept his palm down. He listened. Hinata, he said, if I pull the mirror lousy. What does it do? It will look for its last angle and eat it. Calm. Exact. That voice could walk you out of a nightmare and you would never be scared of the dark again. Okay. Naruto exhaled and rolled his shoulders. He didn't lift his head or open his eyes. He pushed chakra into the mirror, but not into the face of it. He fed it into the river stones around it and hardened them. Then kissed them with slack, then hardened again in a stuttering heartbeat rhythm. The mirror wanted a smooth angle. He gave it a rough one. The surface lost cohesion like a song losing time. Anko threw a smoke capsule. Not the flashy kind but the ugly matte stuff that eats shine. The street went dark. Naruto's other hand opened because he couldn't stop the hair from moving anymore. Threads slid from his scalp smooth as a sigh and laid themselves in the smoke. The enemy rods chimed too bright. He didn't need to see. He flicked his wrist and the nearest rod bearer felt a sud. And drag at his ankles as stone grit climbed the leather and set. The convex water sagged to concave with a glurp, became only water again, and sluiced back into the river the way it had wanted all along. Civilians didn't cheer because no one was sure of anything yet. But they were breathing instead of being a painting. A masked operative hissed and went for the child who had shut his eyes. Naruto's head turned without permission. Hinata's fingers snagged his sleeve like a brake. "Let me," she said. Gentle. She was already there. She didn't blow the man away. She stepped into his stance and tapped. Ed 3 Tenketsu in his shoulder like she was pinning cloth, and his arm fell asleep without the rest of him knowing why. He tried to think his knife at the kid with his remaining hand. The knife didn't obey. Naruto heard that sound. The quiet shock that men make when a plan falls apart, and the space where violence was about to go suddenly feels too big. "Leave," Hinata told him. He caught her eyes wanting to say more and didn't. She meant, "Do not make me turn your own lungs off and then live with it tonight." He heard that too. The fight broke into 3 pieces then. Someone sprinting toward the hospital district trailing more of those silver lines, someone else cutting north on the roofs to the Hokage monument, and a knot of serious bad ideas holding the river for pride. Anko picked the pride spree. Pride is her favorite thing to break. Naruto didn't look at her go. "Hospital," he told Hinata. "I'll mirror your steps," she said, already moving, the pale of her eyes fixed. "And far and soft like snow and surgical steel. No reflections if we can help it." They ran, and the festival sounded wrong behind them, like laughter had just remembered something and stopped. The hospital corridors smelled like antiseptic and warm metal and relief, which is its own scent if you grew up in Konoha. Naruto slowed at the sliding doors because they were glass, because the floor was polished. Because the ceiling lights had an ugly shine. He pulled a strip of cloth from his pocket. It was a silly thing. Just a band he'd used to keep hair out of his face on mission runs, but he tie-dye around his eyes and turned it a fraction so it sat in a crooked angle. The fabric pilled. The pilling made texture. Texture made no reflections. He breathed like he did when he meant to pass out and then not pass out. "Naruto," Hinata said, very low. "Left wing. 2 ahead of us. 3 in the east stairwell, 1 with a too smooth blade. Like crystal pulled thin. Which way to no polish?" Hinata almost smiled despite her mouth being a straight line. "Follow the scuffs where the orderlies bang the carts. Turn where the floor is dull." They did. Naruto put threads down like breadcrumbs you could eat your way back home with. He used them the way a blind man uses a cane, except the cane was everywhere at once. He felt the elevator doors close down the hall by the little slap of gasket against metal. He felt a nurse's heel take a wrong angle and wobble, recovering, and the recovery made him as happy as winning a bet you weren't sure about. He felt the hum in the east stairwell ladder up and defund a mirror in the emergency entrance vestibule. He didn't charge it. He went sideways. They found one operative setting lines between IV poles to make a web. He lifted his head at the sound of Naruto's feet because those are good ears. And he turned a compact mirror so the hallway looked into itself. He didn't see Naruto's threads gliding along the tile. He did see Hinata's outline in the corner of his frame. And the outline didn't blink. He threw the mirror to that angle with a jerk. Hinata didn't exist there anymore. She'd palmed the corner and moved like smoke. The mirror bit the IV street. And instead and reflected the stand's own glint back into the man's hands. He yelped, dropping it when the metal flashed hot. Careful, Hinata said, and Naruto didn't know if she meant him, or the Ma. Who'd just tried to tie a hospital into a knot. He stepped in, basilisk pulse gathered small in his palm like a bird you don't want to startle. He pressed it to the shallow of the operative's ribs just enough to make the intercostal muscles complain. The man's breathing stuttered and his knees forgot. Naruto caught his shoulder before face met tile. Sleep it off, Naruto said, soft. The man tried to hate him. Hate required breath he didn't have. They pushed on. 2 more in the east stairwell traded their rods for kunai when they saw Hinata's sight wasn't fooled. Naruto knocked one against he landing rail and gave the iron a skin of stone so the blow felt like fist on sandbag instead of bone. The man made a sound like surprised prayer. The other took a step and then stopped, ankles ing hard. Threads were pushy when the floor told them to be. Naruto, Hinata said quietly, hand hovering. There was a boy in a gown pressed into the stairwell shadow, knees up under his chin. He had he looked Naruto had seen in old mirrors, the one where you recognize fear and then go through it anyway because what else are you going to do? Hey, Naruto said, keeping his voice between a joke and a secret. You alright? I can't move, the boy whispered. My legs are. He swallowed and looked at Naruto's hands without wanting to. You did it. I did, Naruto said. Honesty cost less long term. He crouched. He didn't take off the band. He set 2 fingers lightly at the tibia's ridge and pushed warmth into the cold edges he'd made. It'll feel like the world wants you to cramp. Breathe at it. The boy breathed. Naruto felt the stone trickle off like ice going back to river. It always felt wrong and then it felt right. He hated that he had to be the person who turned wrong into right with such a thin tool. Better? He asked. The boy nodded. Tears hadn't fallen. Naruto liked him faster for that. Not for being tough, but for being willing to be seen as not. Hinata put a hand to the boy's hair without anyone thinking it childish. They secured the rest of the corridor in motions that didn't ask for applause. In one room, an old woman pursed her lips and told Naruto that his bandage was crooked. He told her he liked it that way. She shrugged like that was valid. Masks scraped beyond the far door. The last of them left a sigil when he fled. He burned it into the wood with a seal that bit itself and melted. Naruto didn't see the image flower. He heard the crackle of it and smelled pine sap go to charcoal. Hinata did the seeing. The sigil was a face on a disc, a woman's mouth. Drawn at the moment she wanted to say a thing and didn't. Snakes for hair. The lines were not leering. They were tired. Script crawled a ring around her. Hinata read, voice level. Deliver the Gorgonean at the border shrine. Refuse. And the village turns to garden. Naruto didn't like the way his name for the thing rolled around the back of his tongue like it belonged to him. Enko slid into the doorway at that very moment. Blood stippling one cuff. Eyes bright like someone had told her the good joke and she finally got it. She took in the sigil at a glance. Well, that's cheerful. Did they leave a time? Or is it one of those, we turn your whole place into an art exhibit whenever we feel like it, ultimatums? Nothing about time, Hinata said. She touched the ring's bottom arc. There, faint, and only obvious to eyes that watched chakra move rather than paint. A symbol ghosted over a symbol, a superimposed image like a mistake a careful scribe would never make. Look at me not looking, Enko said. Standing at an angle to the burned wood like the door frame might spit at her. Don't, Naruto said, instinct tightening his throat. Her smile twitched. Not at him, at herself. She went still and listened. Not a mirror, she muttered. A window for one person. Good catch, Hyuga. She slapped a seal over it. Quick fingers, matte characters that soaked up light instead of throwing it. The room dimmed by an inch. So, border shrine. I know a route. Of course you do, Naruto said. You know all the gossip. And the snakes. I only know the snakes socially, Enko said. Professionally, we're enemies. They tell me things anyway. We could make a field trip of it. Bring snacks. Not bring mirrors. Naruto laughed and felt it loosen the place where fear had set like plaster under his sternum. People were safe here, at least for the moment. He wanted to keep moving before the moment went stale. They swept the hospital top to bottom, and if anyone asked why Naruto's eyes were kavir, he told them the truth. It helps me think. No one argued with a boy who had just made a river forget bad manners. They stepped back into an evening that had burned its brightest lights and scattered them along the gutter. The festival was still going in the way that life does even when you break its face and set it again. Tenten arrived as if conjured by the need for things you can hold in you. Our hands that make fear stop being abstract. She wore a harness cinched with 4 matte ink tags, the kind she made herself in the hours other kids used for gossip and naps. Her hair buns were skewed like she'd dressed in a hurry. She tossed Naruto a bundle wrapped in black cloth. "Mirror wraps," she said. "For poles, for swords, for your idiot forehead if you decide to headbutt anything. It's pain. Tea mixed with sand and charcoal and a little ground seashell gives it a toothy finish. Kills glare, eats light. Don't get it in your mouth." Naruto didn't ask whether she had discovered that last bit empirically. "You're a treasure. I'm a weapon closet," she said. "Let me be my purpose." Enko told her about the shrine. Tenten nodded like that was a toy she'd been promised as a child. "I've got bolts that throw rope and rope that likes climbing. Ridges. Teeth. I made a batch for Sasuke because he complains about gravity, but he didn't show at the festival and I'm not letting them gather dust." "Was there a time on the threat?" "Nothing written," Hinata said, eyes going soft again like the Byakugan had tired of being awake and wanted a nap. "But we're on their clock. They wouldn't risk an move unless they believed we had a piece they need." "What piece?" Tenten asked. Enko looked at Naruto like he'd brought a snake to class in his pocket. "The thing they wrote on the door. Gorgonean. The head. The head," Naruto repeated, and his scalp prickled exactly where his hair had tipped into quiet threads. He shifted the band down a fraction so the cloth covered more of his world, and everything he could hear rushed into the extra space. They cut north along the rooftops because alleys kept the wrong kind of shine. Enko moved like she was flirting with gravity and gravity liked her back. Tenten ran like she'd been born with springs where knees usually go. Hinata didn't make a sound when she landed and somehow made Naruto feel loud despite not touching anything. He kept his threads out, laying them along ridge tiles and guard rails, not because he couldn't see but because he preferred not to trust the way sight lies at the corners. The village sounded like repaired music, drums trying again, laughter coming back timid in case it wasn't allowed. The Hokage monument climbed from the dark like old gods pretending to be stone. Naruto always thought their faces looked tired, which he liked. It meant they did the work. The path up was half scrub, half steps, most of it patched with gravel that kicked up under your soles if you tried to get cocky. Naruto did not try. They found the mirror at the third's chin. It wasn't a trap. That would have been polite. It was worse, a round of polished steel, hand-sized, propped against the stone with a wedge of rock. It looked like nothing. That kind of modesty is expensive if you're a weapon. Tenten lifted her hand to throw a cloth over it. Hinata caught her wrist. "Wait." They waited. Naruto held the edge of the world in his threads and listened for what walls know. The monument knew everything that ever leaned against it. He let that weight talk. The mirror didn't shine. It made you feel like you were missing a word and it sat on the back of your tongue making fun of you. It reflected the monument and the skyline in Naruto's gang of misfits, all wrong by a hair. Naruto could tell because of how wind sounded against roofs. The angles were off. He hated that. He liked things true even when they were bleak. "First angles not ours," Enko said. "Throw paint." "Not yet," Hinata said, and Naruto could hear the way she od when she said it, a little forward on the balls of her feet, like she was ready to risk what she was about to ask of herself. She tilted her head and splayed her fingers at shoulder height. Byakugan. The mirror didn't grab her sight. It tried. He felt it, a silky tug on the weave of her chakra-like fingers on a braid. She held herself steady like she was braced in a current. "It isn't just reflecting," she said, breathing like she had infinite patience if you deserved it. "It's bending a view we don't have." Tenten made a noise. "Bending from where?" "See," Hinata said. "Salt. Depth. How. L that shouldn't have light has too much." "Show offy," Enko muttered, because when the world is too big, Enko makes it small with snark. All the best enemies are. If you want my guess, they want to bring the head to a place that already knows how to be a mirror. Save on energy. Smart if you don't care about people. Naruto's shoulder itched where the band sat. He scratched. The cloth was warm. Like it had been out in summer and drank it. He frowned and pulled the band down. A symbol burned into it while he watched. A shallow hissing as charcoal went from draw to brand without anyone holding fire. A face in the old style. Snakes for hair, mouth set. It hurt like being watched by someone who knew you before you decided who to be. The burn didn't blister his skin. It didn't have to. Have you ever had a name called too accurately? It felt like that. Under the face. 24 scratched itself out, the ash pitting the weave. Tenten said something that would have had an old woman popping her with a paper fan. Anko whistled low. Hinata's hand hovered like she was tempted to touch the fresh mark, and then she didn't, because she was good at knowing when someone has enough to hold. Deadline, Anko said. Border Shrine by tomorrow night. They're making it easy for us to find the meeting spot and hard to come back if we're stupid. Which is my brand, but even I know when to bring people with particular eyes. Hyuga, I'm coming. Hinata said like it wasn't a decision she'd made just now but one the world had made before her breath ever fogged a window. She met Naruto's face band with her eyes. He didn't feel seen. He felt understood. It was worse and better. We'll need gear, Tenten added. Matte plates for everything. Cords that eat shine. I'll make more on the run. I've got the travel kit. We can be at the border shrines before dawn if we go light and don't nap. Naruto looked into the mirror not with sight but with the part of himself that put threads into stone. The sea on the Their side didn't move like water in a place Konoha would ever consider familiar. It held its shape like a person holds a lie. He wouldn't take the head they wanted because he didn't have it. He had something worse. He touched the band at his eyes. All right, he said. We give them what they don't expect. We go. We don't stare. We don't let them see us without consent. We keep Konoha from becoming a garden. A stone garden, Tenten said, trying the words out like a bad recipe she would somehow make edible anyway. Anko hooked an arm around Naruto's neck and pulled him into a half headlock that wasn't a headlock. If they want a snake's head, she said, breath warm, they can have my ex's. I know where he lives. Hinata's laugh was more like a warm exhale than a sound. The mirror didn't like that. It shivered on its little wedge. It swallowed the monument's outline and spat out an image that wasn't Konoha for a heartbeat, an underwater hull flecked with bronze discs, pillars that rippled like they were breathing. A set of steps leading down instead of up. On those steps, a shape as big as a warship that wasn't a warship but thought like one. Sea Temple, Hinata said, naming it because. Naming a thing is how you keep it from owning you. She reached for the cloth. Now, Tenten threw the wrap in a clean arc. It settled over the mirror like night deciding to be helpful. The image cut off. The monument came back. Naruto exhaled a breath he hadn't meant to keep. Let's tell the old man, Anko said, meaning the Hokage and also not only him. Then we move. Naruto stood a moment longer. Hand on the stone cheek of someone who had once believed you could protect a village with enough grit and enough lies. He didn't think the lies were working anymore, not the big ones. He thought you had to tell the truth to bad people and see if any part of them hated being bad. He wondered if that was naive or the only insurgency that ever stuck. Tomorrow, he said, we end their angle. The wind lifted and laid his hair like a hand. He felt the threads settle against his neck, whispering in a language he didn't yet know but almost understood, the way you understand the rhythm of a song before you hear the words. They went down the steps together because going alone was for fools and poets, and he was trying to be a better thing than either. He slept 2 hours. He dreamed stone, moving like water and water remembering it had once been stone. When he woke, the band at his eyes had cooled, but the mark burned clean as if it had been there his whole life. He tied it again without looking. His hands knew the knot now the way his feet knew Konoha in the dark. Hinata was waiting under the awning with a pack. Tenten was already testing the throw on a new bolt with a cord that had teeth sewn into the braid. Anko had a snake peeking from her sleeve. It flicked a tongue like it was tasting the joke ahead of time. Ready, leader? Anko asked, because she liked naming things the moment before they became true so she could claim she started it. Naruto didn't argue with the word. He also didn't bow to it. He nodded. He waited. He listened to the thin thread that ran under the village and hummed to his bones. Let's go find the people who think mirrors make truth, he said. And teach them angles can lie too. They went. A sliver of metal slid out from under the cloth on the monument hours after they were gone. The wind had fingers. The cloth lifted, by inches. Just enough for the mirror to see a piece of the world it wanted. It looked at itself and at the stone faces above and at the river's curve below. In the quiet before dawn, the mirror showed a temple that breathed. In a different part of the village, at the orphanage's back gate, ivy shifted on the wall as if listening. No one saw that, because no one was awake who had permission to. Permission matters. It's a kind of jutsu you can forget exists until it kills you. The first light took the rooftops. Birds committed to the bit. Naruto and his crew stepped into the trees that shade the border trail, eyes forward, a pack light and everything heavier carried in other ways. The day stretched ahead. It had glass teeth and a river in its mouth. He didn't care. He knew where his threads could reach. He brushed his fingers along the bark of a crooked pine as he passed and left it a whisper of stone. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remember. The pine hummed back to him, and he heard something answer in rock half a mile away, and he thought maybe this was what legacy really was, not names carved in faces, but a village singing to itself through stone and wood and the spine of a stubborn boy who wanted to make a different kind of monument. They moved faster. They didn't bring a mirror. They brought each other. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Cavern That Remembers. They left before the sun decided what kind of day it wanted to be. Cool shade. Bird argument. The sky a pale bruise waiting for color. Naruto adjusted the band at his eyes and felt the woven mark breathe against his skin like something alive and sympathetic. It didn't blind him. It reminded him not to trust what wanted to be looked at. Hinata walked a little ahead, scanning, quiet in the way that meant her mind had already drawn 4 maps. Enko whistled a tune with no regard for pitch and every regard for nerve. Tenten tested the pull on a new line as they jogged, 3 mat cords braided into a bite, teeth stitched along the length like the grin of a friendly shark. Teeth, Enko said approvingly. Now we're speaking my dialect. They're abrasive, Tenten said, not looking up. Polished surfaces hate them. Mirrors cry. Naruto grinned. Don't make the mirrors cry, Tenten. Then we're the villains. Mirrors can fend for themselves, she said, and clipped the cord to her harness with a brisk satisfaction that made Naruto feel steadier than any pep talk would have. The forest shouldered them into a narrow canyon as the light turned warm. Limestone rose on either side, fluted and pocked where water had taken long, patient bites. The air had a crowded echo, as if sound didn't want to leave. Good ambush country. Naruto's threads slipped down from his hair and kissed the rock on both sides. They hummed back a map of everything they'd touched in the last year: rains, fires, kids scrambling for birds, nests. Reflections ahead, Hinata breathed. Wires hung at odd heights, discs tucked into crevices to throw light down. They're using the canyon's own shape as a megaphone. You can't let anyone have nice topography, Enko said. They weaponize it. The first silver wire was easy to dodge. The second was not. Sun slid down it like a blade. A flick of brightness cut Naruto's cheek without ever touching him. The air itself had a sharp edge there. He tasted copper. He didn't look at the wire. He felt the groove it sang into his threads and stepped left. A woman's laugh rang from the canyon mouth ahead. It didn't mock. It measured. Konoha field trip. Night vision headband. Serpent boy. Hunter. 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 The word fell 3 times like a pebble down a well. I wondered how you'd come. I hoped you'd bring eyes. Celine, Enko said, the syllables as flat as a blade laid on a table. Your last name, of the mirror, is a little on the nose. Names keep history honest, the woman called. And your own, Mitarashi, is a joke with teeth. Tenten's hand skimmed Naruto's sleeve. Permission to move if he wanted it, back up if he didn't. He brushed her knuckles in answer, then set more threads and let the canyon talk. The slope narrowed into a throat. Above, thin discs hung on wire webs, rotating slow to catch sunlight and fling it where instructed. The discs didn't gleam like normal polished metal. They drank light until they were full, then spat it along angles that refused to be where they should. Hinata, Naruto murmured, give me the seam in the weave, not the biggest shine. She didn't point. That would have been rude to the canyon. 6 paces ahead, Left wall. No, lower, there. The wire's tension is wrong there. An anchor. If you pop it, the whole net drifts for a second. Seconds enough. Naruto slid forward, hands light on stone, threads reading the moorings. A wire thrummed like a plucked string. He pressed his palm to the anchor point and whispered, "Forget." Stone listened. It always did. He didn't turn it to granite or quartz or anything you could sell a mason. He made it remember silt and then remember itself all at once. The anchor let go like something that had been clenching too long. The net shivered and sagged. Tenten moved in the same heartbeat, firing a bolt. The line hissed through air and bit into a spinning disc. The disc stopped trying to be a mirror and started being a problem. The cord's teeth chewed its polished skin, turned gleam to grit, and the light shot sideways into harmless scrub. A shape swung down from above, belts of wire around her hips, toes barely touching rock. Celine didn't wear a mask. Her face was nothing you'd remember in a market and everything you'd remember in a fight. Matte paint streaked her cheekbones. In each hand she held blades like straightened moons. The blades didn't exactly reflect. They offered opinions about angles. "Kids," she said, and her mouth was amused and her eyes were not. "I told my commander it would be children. He said legends always arrive in their first draft too early." Anko clicked her tongue. "We're old enough to buy our own heartbreak. Come down and find out." Celine obliged. She didn't attack Anko first. She went for Hinata, because hunters go for eyes. Anko was already there, hip checking in casually, a gust at Hinata's shoulder that knocked the first strike a finger's width off its path. It was enough. Hinata slipped the second blade, pivoting on the ball of her foot and tapping Celine's wrist at a tenketsu that made the tendons seize. The blade wobbled. Naruto put a thread rough the hilt and hummed a basilisk pulse down it. The metal complained at a frequency you felt in your molars. Celine dropped that blade, smiled even as she did, and stepped into the empty space she'd made by stepping wrong. Her other hand traced a gentle arc. Light bent in the canyon like a door opening. Naruto grabbed the nearest sensible thing, a scrubby conifer rooted in a crack, and slammed it to stone with a slap of his palm, skinning its trunk with mineral grit so it would hold when gravity changed its mind. He threw himself into the place where the canyon used to be, trusting his threads more than eyes. The world skipped a beat. A bright seam sliced the through space where his head would have been. He felt the cut on the band as a warm line that cooled immediately as the cloth drank it. "Refraction dome," Tenten said between teeth. "She's moving the hinge, not the door." "Don't describe my work for me," Celine said, and flicked her wrist. A hemisphere of interference snapped in to place, a pale shimmer in the air like heat off stone. Things inside looked half a pace to the left of themselves. Naruto's threads slid over the dome's skin and felt nothing, no purchase. They could have been pushing wind. A kunai thunked into the shimmer and reappeared from an impossible angle above his shoulder, tapping the band like a polite tap on a window. Anko's hand flashed, smoke capsule cracking. The canyon filled with ugly dark. The dome didn't care. It didn't need sight. It ate geometry. Hinata's voice cut through like a line on paper. "Seam at 2 o'clock, 9 paces, no, now 7. It's mobile. She's pivoting the whole fault." "Got it." Tenten fired a second line. The toothed cord hit the seam and a muttered curse from Celine told Naruto it had bit something that wasn't supposed to be bitten. The shimmer jittered, broke into facets. Naruto flattened his palm to the canyon floor and told the limestone to remember snakes. Not imagery, motion. The ground shivered into ridges that slid underfoot with a slow, rolling slope that made balance a negotiation instead of a right. Celine's toe-fine control met a floor that wouldn't give her clean leverage. She swore, calmly, like a woman annoyed at a zipper, and the shimmer dipped. He slipped through the smallest weakness he could feel, close enough for breath. The basilisk pulse he put into her side was a heartbeat's weight, not a hammer. Her ribs clenched and her knees buckled because muscles keep secrets with bones, and he asked nicely in the right language. He caught her elbow so she wouldn't crack her skull, pulled the blades away, and cranked the cord down. "Alive," he said to Tenten, who had already prioritized it that way. "Breathing." Barely irritated, Celine said, and gave him the professional courtesy of not going limp like a sack of rice. "You restrain cleanly. Your teacher is either a pacifist or ruthless. Both." Anko said. On alternating days. The dome sighed itself out. Sun came back cruel and honest. Naruto kept his hand on the cord because Selene looked like someone who could dislocate a thumb and slip free if you blinked toward a glare. She didn't try. She studied his band like she knew it held a secret but was boat spooked enough to avoid peeking under a tarp. You'll get yourself killed if you keep leaning into kindness this hard, she said matter-of-factly, which is kinder than lots of sympathy. Probably, Naruto said. I'll try to plan around it. She laughed again, short. You were told to bring the head. He didn't blink. He wasn't looking at her in a way that required it. We're told to bring a thing we don't have. We came to ask a place that might. Then we're walking together, Selene said, tilting her face toward the canyon's back. I'm to test you. He will offer terms. You will refuse. This is the dance. Try not to stumble. I dislike operatic deaths. We're not good at choreography, Anko said. But we rock a freestyle. They moved deeper together, because song. Times enemies share corridors before they remember it. The canyon cut down into a serape of strata, colors stacked by 1,000 springs and suns. Naruto's threads read the layers and shivered at one band in particular, cool. Crude marks carved by hand rather than water. The air changed temperature at the threshold like breath had decided to go slow there. The shrine waited with the kind of patience that doesn't congratulate itself. The entrance was a long mouth full of short teeth, stalactites and tights all trying to meet and failing by inches. Runes ran along the line where the rock's memory had been scored. They weren't the flowery kind. They were blunt and utilitarian, lines that made the hair on Naruto's arms feel a fraction heavier. An attendant knelt by a brazier just inside, feeding it dry, fragrant herb. She wore a light robe patterned with zigzag lines like the back of a sleeping snake. Her red hair was tied high and harsh. She kept her face down as they approached, as if courtesy demanded it. Naruto's threads didn't like the way her chakra sat. Not in a wrong way. In a careful one. He knew careful. He'd worn it as skin. Welcome, she said, not lifting her head yet. Her voice landed like something that had traveled too far and would sit a while before making the rest of the way. The shrine remembers serpents. The shrine was told to expect a boy who doesn't look. The shrine would like to know whether you were told to expect kindness. Wasn't on the handout, Anko said. Any snacks? The redhead lifted her gaze then and Naruto had to be glad he wore a band. Her EYs were sharp and tired and meeting them would have been like meeting a mirror that told you how little sleep you'd had and how much honesty you could afford today. She took him in the way someone catalogs an injury without moving a patient yet. Your chakra, she said, a touch of clinical in the soft. Warm center, cold edge. Like a hand that's been in water and then by the fire. You shouldn't push it against arteries. Noted, Naruto said. And you are shrine's attendant, she said, and didn't volunteer more. The careful in her chakra flickered when she said it, as if the word truth had a burr on it in her mouth. Call me Karen. Anko narrowed her eyes like a cat seeing something that pretended to be a snake. Karen, she repeated. Professional courtesy question. You heal for pay or purpose? Yes, Karen said, and then her mouth softened, like she'd remembered she was allowed to have one. Purpose pays. Follow me. The first hall was long and low, with walls close enough to touch both if you had wide shoulders. The floor was smoother than the canyon and shone a little, not with polish but with that sheen rock gets rubbed by hands and feet over years. Runes inlaid along the baseboards made a line like a pulse. Naruto didn't like how his own pulse felt answering it. The echo in the hall magnified breath, certain notes leaping ahead of others like a soloist running to the front of a stage. He felt his heart tapping an eager rhythm against his ribs. It was too loud. Hinata's hand brushed the air in front of him. Slow, she whispered. This place listens for the strongest heartbeat. And what? Anko said, half an eye on the ceiling like it might try to drop chewing gum on her. Pats it on the head. Turns it to head, Tenten muttered, then grimaced at her own joke. Sorry. Karen's voice came back from the front of the line, level. If you want to walk through, your heart needs to be the quiet one. Or it needs to learn discretion. These stones like restraint. They don't punish fear. They punish arrogance. Ah, Anko said, stepping back like she was making room for herself. I'll stand here and think humble thoughts. Naruto smiled under the band. He exhaled until his ribs stopped trying to push back. He remembered the orphanage when he was small and the way you had to sleep pretending you weren't listening to anyone else's breathing so they could ignore yours. He remembered the silk bitter cordial at holidays that old ladies made you drink so you could learn the taste of bitter and sweet together. He let his heart do what old houses teach, be Lu. D when it mattered and quiet when people needed sleep. Hinata's breath found him, twins to the sound of sandals on stone. She took the lead. She didn't force the pace. She invited it. Naruto set 3 thick threads down along the hall. Not to drag or guide but to hum just off key, another pulse for the stone to consider and choose instead. The runes, glow softened. The grip on his sternum eased, like being let through a jealous door because you made it laugh. Enko walked with exaggerated solemnity, which is just another way of telling a place you respect its rules. The hall opened on a room it looked like someone had pressed a thumb into a block of clay and then gently taken it away. The floor's stones weren't tiles. They were flat scales half overlapping, every one slightly different, of them carved with shallow marks that wanted to be letters but were also pictures of sound. Karen lifted a hand. This one asks 2 questions, she said, not turning. What do you step on when you're not sure? And what do you refuse to step on even if you're sure? Not darkness and not light, Tenten said under her breath, eyes going bright with the kind of problem that usually ends with a tool. She knelt and scattered a handful of washers from a pouch. They stopped where they found friction, on certain scales, and slid off others. The ones that stopped hummed against her calluses. She smiled. These like weight that's honest. The slick ones want greed. Greed doesn't like Matt, Enko said. Make a shirt out of this floor and wear it to a noble's party. Tenten started placing washers in a path, testing with fingertip pressure the way a musician checks a string. Hinata traced with her sight where the scales overlapped strongest. Naruto touched one of the slick ones with a thread. ND felt it try to bite him back, a quick creep of grit up the thread toward his scalp. He pulled away with a flick and smoothed his hair, making a face. Alive? Tenten asked. Ambitious, he said. I like it less when rock tries to eat me than when I ask it to help. Karen watched him through half-lowered lashes. Your threads vibrate like chakra lines in the body when you set them in certain angles. If you get cocky here, they'll read you as a lie. Then you'll be stone in your own language. Cool. Naruto blew out a breath to void the urge to joke when unsure. He stepped where Tenten and Hinata had marked. The floor didn't try to test his bones. It accepted his weight the way an old friend lets you put your head on their shoulder without thinking about the neck pain that's coming. Halfway through, a disc in the ceiling shifted, and a spear of light knifed at an angle. Tenten's hand flashed, mirror-eating cord snapping up with a purr. The light hit the cord and lost interest in being anyone's weapon. Hinata nodded once to Tenten without looking. Well done, acknowledged, move. Teamwork puts swagger on a leash. They reached the far side. Karen paused, hand on the frame of the next door. Head tipped like she was listening through the rock. Last one, she said. The shrine keeps the thing you came for. It wants a pledge. No oaths, Enko said automatically. I've quit that habit. It doesn't require words, Karen said. It requires restraint. Open your eyes when you want to shut them. Shut them when you want to open them. Touch only what invites your hand. Leave anything that flinches. Reasonable, Hinata murmured. Intimate, Enko said. I feel undressed already. The inner chamber was smaller than Naruto expected and bigger than he could explain. A low basin sat at its center, water as flat as glass. Except the water had depth like you get when you look at someone you intend to know for years. Around the basin, carved serpents in relief, not snarling, just present. The air felt like the inside of a wrist, thin skin soft with blood near. Naruto set his threads and then took them back. They twitched as if offended. The room didn't want feelers. It wanted trust. He untied the band a fraction, enough to let the world through a slit of cloth. Hinata's hand hovered at his elbow, permission to steady, a warning not to watch. He met the slit of sight to water, not to carving. Water offered him his face smudged and narrowed by the strip of fabric. He looked as tired as he felt. Better, honest. Something rose from the basin like a coin from a palm. A circlet, bro. NZE dark and matte where time had eaten shine. The metal was braided into serpents that didn't smile. In the brow, a disc stamped with a woman's mouth almost speaking. The thing hummed without sound, a pressure on his molars. The hum said, I will take your excess if you promise to have any. He reached. The circlet flinched. He withdrew. His hand shook. He didn't realize it until Hinata's palm dyed his wrist and he had a second heartbeat to laugh at himself. He nodded once to the basin as if to an old auntie who'd decided whether or not to feed him seconds. Then he held his breath. Then he let it go. He reached again, layer by layer, the way you approach an alley dog that doesn't trust people with shoes. The circlet didn't flinch this time. He lifted it, slow as a man lifting a sleeping child and trying not to wake them. Cold, heavier than it looked. It settled into his hands with an acceptance that felt like a contract signed by both. He looked to Karen without looking, side turned. Your pulse is already aggressive, she said quietly. This thing will help you feather. It will not forgive stupidity. May I? He hesitated a beat long enough to be honest about it, then handed it to her. Karen examined without ornament. Her fingers moved like she'd set bones and chided their owners for trying to get up too soon. She brushed the inner surface and pricked her thumb, smeared a dot of blood across a rune that wasn't visible until it drank. Her expression didn't change. It likes Uzumaki tolerably. She passed it back. Wear it 2 knuckles above your eye. Do not over-tighten. If you grimace, you're strangling yourself. Good bedside manner, Anko said. You practice on friends or enemies. Whoever stops bleeding when I ask, Karen said, and there was a glint behind the tired in her eyes now. She hadn't decided which they were yet. That was fair. She watched Naruto raise the circlet and set it lightly against the band. The metal warmed against his skin like it had been sitting in the sun. He felt the room tilt. No, right itself, as if the angle he hadn't known he was living at had straightened. Blink, Karen said. He did. The edge of the basilisk pulse, the bite Chi wanted to creep down his threads every time he read the world, dulled to a texture he could grip. He exhaled and it didn't come out like relief, more like a plan found an outline. Again, Karen said, feather it. Naruto opened his hand. Power gathered there like a cat deciding whether it liked you. He let it roll forward a hair. The air at his palm went cool. He closed 2 fingers and it retreated. Twice more, smaller each time. Hinata's voice threaded in, precise. Keep it from skating along the ulnar. You're overcorrecting. Nudge at the radius. Yes, there. He caught a smile threatening his mouth and let it happen. You're bossy. Correct, she said, and Naruto would have let her tell him how to breathe for the rest of his life if it meant not turning anyone into a statue by accident ever again. Walk, Karen said. Don't act. Bind, release, bind, release. Ankles, then wrists, then a coin on the floor. Tenten flipped a coin to him. He let it land. He tapped the circlet against the band with 2 fingers. Finding the place it kissed. He pushed a ribbon of cold over the coin and felt its edges grit for a heartbeat, then soften. He could do this all day. He knew better than to think he should. Anko leaned against a serpent relief like it was a bar, watching him with the kind of pride she only admitted by insulting you later. All right, she said, just when Naruto found the lace between too much and not enough and paused in it like resting on a landing midway up the stairs. I'd marry the circlet if I were you. That would make the paperwork interesting, a voice from the hall said. And the air in the room bent, very slightly, like heat above a road. Celine. She stepped into the chamber with her hands open. The matte paint on her face had smudged, which meant she'd sweat, which made her pleasingly human. She moved like she'd been invited and forgiven for showing up late, which is a very specific form of arrogance. Karen's hand drifted toward the brazier. Not fast. Ready. This is a sanctum. It's a hallway with opinions, Celine said, not unkind. I lost a blade and a little blood. I thought I deserved to see the party favor. Naruto set the circlet fully, tightening the smallest fraction. The hum in his could hear but not ears settled. He didn't step in front of anyone. He didn't have to. He centered his weight, the way he did when Iruka told him to stop bouncing. And the room decided to treat him as furniture, sturdy, useful, unexciting. Sometimes leadership is being the most boring thing in a crisis so everyone else can be interesting. Celine studied the circlet, then him. I've been told to bring you to a neutral summit, she said. Ishi no Kagami Fortress. The pebble tossers want to talk about divine risk in front of banners and snacks. Yo, you will be allowed to set a corner of the tablecloth so you think you're part of it. Anko snorted. You must be a hit at diplomatic mixers. I make poor appetizers, Celine said dryly. I'm a bad idea that looks good on a plate. Hinata's expression didn't change. Her eyes warmed a degree toward Naruto, back toward ground. If we go, she said, we'll go on our feet instead of our knees. Knees are bad for breath control, Karen said. And her chin tipped a fraction like she'd decided to let the tired in her gaze be sincere. Take me with you. Anko arched a brow. You realized you were telling us how to use a thing that can kill a village, and you're volunteering. I realized you don't know what your pulse will do in a crowd, Karen said. I can feel it from here. I've got a clinic 2 rooms over I care very much about. If your kindness slips for a breath because someone calls you a monster in front of children, I want my hand on your wrist when it happens. Naruto felt the words land. Where fear lives when you pretend it doesn't. He nodded. All right. Also, Karen added, almost conversational, my employer's employer would kill me for coming, and I'm tired of my blood belonging to other people. There it was. Trust given in a sentence shaped like a shrug. Naruto adjusted the circlet and faced Celine. You said terms. Perseus IX will offer you a deal at Ishi no Kagami, she said. Give the head. Walk away. We turn our hunger elsewhere. Tenten made the small sound that people make when they step on a nail and are impressed that they didn't swear. We don't have a head. You will, Celine said, tilting her chin toward the basin that had offered Naruto the circlet. You keep telling the world what you aren't. It keeps giving you what you are. Be careful which gift you accept. Spooky. Anko muttered. Then louder. What happens if we refuse, Celine? Your boss likes spectacle. He'll call it tragic necessity and sharpen the knife on a speech. Celine's mouth thinned. He'll show you a garden and say, look what gods do. And he'll be wrong about who did it. She glanced at Karen, a flicker like a match struck where no one would thank you. Might we have tea before we go perform at your fortress? Karen sniffed like every anti-Anko had ever annoyed. Only if you don't bleed in the cup. They sat at the threshold to drink something that wasn't tea so much as leaf-warmed water. And Naruto felt the shrine accept it because everyone behaved themselves. Hinata drew a map in dust with her sandal while Anko flirted with the snake etched into the stone like eye. Tea was a living thing and she wanted it to sneak up on her just to see if it could. Tenten murmured to her chords, plucking them like strings, then made a face when Anko hummed along, off-key on purpose. Naruto practiced feathering his pulse in his palm until the rune's little hairs stopped standing up. Karen watched without touching again, which is its own kind of attention. When he got cocky and let the cold creep too far along his ring finger, she tapped his wrist bone with a knuckle. Not hard. Enough to remind. He corrected. She nodded. He felt like he'd passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. They stepped back into the canyon lean as thieves and twice as purposeful. The sun had burned to clean white now, all the red gone to somewhere that wasn't their concern. Celine walked a half step to their left. The kind of proximity that says yes I could cut you and no I don't want to and yes I'm still thinking about it. Hinata tracked the high wires with her eyes and kept her voice low. She guided Tenten's cord shot to a stubborn disc. Anko collected 2 little mirror shards in a pouch and labeled it with a bit of chalk. Do not polish. Tenten kissed the chalked words with 2 fingers for luck. Halfway to the fortress, at a narrow place where the canyon spit them onto a scrub plateau, Celine stopped. She lifted her hand and made a small turn of her wrist. The air pebbled. Not air, light. A new hemisphere flickered alive around them, not the shimmer from before. This one was cleaner, finer grained, the way silk and cheap satin both shine, but one makes your fingers greedy. Refraction dome snapped into place with a soft chime. Naruto's threads skated off it again, offended. Sorry, Celine said, voice crisp to business. He insists on ceremony. Don't look for exits that aren't there. Perseus walked into sight like light finding a surface so black it felt like a trick. His armor didn't reflect, it dismissed. He wore a diagonal sash that had no color and therefore all of them, if you stared. His face would be handsome if you mistook control for kindness. He carried no visible weapons because he trusted angles to be sharp enough. Konoha's children, he said without disdain. Soon as Wind will join us at the fortress. For now, we speak terms. I am Perseus IX, heir to the Aegis craft. You carry a mark you shouldn't. Then stop leaving your things on our monuments, Anko said. We're messy like that, we keep lost property. Perseus's mouth tipped a centimeter. You wear the Gorgonean, boy. Circlet, Naruto said. We don't do heads. Yet, Perseus said mildly. Your village will regret that as a policy. Naruto didn't rise to it. He adjusted the circlet the tiniest fraction and felt his pulse answer. We're on our way to Ishi no Kagami. You want a show, you'll get one. Until then, if you test this dome on us, you'll lose your lieutenant. Selene's fingers twitched where Naruto couldn't see but could feel. Perseus didn't look at her. She knows the cost. So do I. I will bear it. Well, Anko said cheerfully, that's romantic. Hinata didn't shift her stance. She did change the angle of her head, enough to catch Naruto's profile under the band. 2 lines of violet chakra pulsed at her temples. He didn't need eyes to feel her see him. Walk, Naruto said to Perseus. Talk at the fortress. Perseus's gaze flicked to Karen. And you, me, Karen said, bored. Hand on hip like a woman waiting at an empty counter. Got a problem with my face. Just a category error, Perseus said. You patch cliffs and pretend you are not excavating. Karen smiled with no humor. Everyone pretends a little. Perseus lifted his hand. The dome peeled back like dawn over a mountain. It wasn't dramatic, just inevitable. The canyon exhaled. He stepped aside, as if they'd held the right of way all along. They walked past him and none of them turned their head to watch him. That kind of self-control is a prayer. Temari met them where the canyon opened. Ed into a scrub plain cut by the skeleton of a riverbed. She stood with 2 Suna shinobi flanking, a fan slung over her shoulder like a weapon and a statement. Her hair looked like she'd argued with Wind for fun and won. She took them in without blinking. Quick eyes, sharp principles. Naruto liked her as fast as he liked sensible shoes. Konoha, she said, you bring snakes to the party and then tell no one to shine anything. This day gets better. Temari, Anko sang, arms out as if for a bad hug. You look like a desert brewed you overnight. Your metaphors were thirsty, Temari said, sighed. Stepping the arms without looking like she had. We heard about the festival. We heard about a mirror at your monument and a deadline that doesn't belong to you. I brought the kind of men who don't like reflective surfaces. They're all terribly ugly. They can't be insulted by glass. One of the Suna shinobi snorted and didn't stop fast enough to hide he'd been flattered. Tenten shouldered her gear with a grunt. At the fortress, she said to Temari, I'll need a workshop that doesn't throw back my face at me. You can have the storeroom with the broken lamp, Temari said without missing a beat. I expect gratitude in the form of devices that make my job easier. Done, Tenten said. Hinata and Temari measured each other in a heartbeat's worth of shared understanding and respectful disdain. The way 2 women who run their teams in completely different ways still recognize the bone of the work. Temari's gaze flicked to Naruto's band and circlet. Sharp, not unkind. We'll escort you, she said to him, then louder. With a small shift in posture that told all the onlookers who would be walking in front and who would be watching their backs, as equals. The Covenant's operatives along the ridge didn't like that line. You could hear it in the way their feet shifted on stone, tiny scrapes of offense. Naruto didn't drink it. He was thirsty for other things. They made camp at the edge of the plain because Temari refused to walk her people into a fortress tired. She'd learned the hard way that wine punishes arrogance same as any other element. Selene perched just beyond the light, a shadow with a mouth. Karen set a small kit on a flattish rock. Bandages, a paste in a jar, a needle still threaded with thin suture. She cleaned a nick near Naruto's ear he hadn't noticed. You're going to pretend it doesn't sting, she said. Don't. Animals hide pain to avoid getting eaten. You don't need to audition for the food chain. Hinata's going to tell me to thank you, Naruto said, Beck. That's who he'd become in the last few hours, a man who announced gratitude before he remembered to be embarrassed by it. I wasn't, Hinata said, which meant she was, which made him smile. Temari picked her way over. Handed Naruto a canteen. Drink, she said, with the no-nonsense of a sister who historically watched brothers fail at hydration. We'll break at dawn. The fortress likes early arrivals, it makes them feel important. Quote, Naruto drank. He would have given the canteen back except the water didn't stay water. It slicked a mirror inside the tin with a little ache in the metal as it made itself flat. His reflection came up narrow and long like you see yourself in a spoon. Then the image flickered. Konoha's orphanage gate appeared where his face should be, Ivy moving as if listening. The whisper didn't come loud enough to alarm anyone. It came the way a bad idea comes, plausibly, so you might agree to it. Bring the head to see, it said, or your home becomes a memory. The reflection swung a degree and he saw the backyard where he used to chalk lines for games on the stone and get told off about it. A child stepped into frame and then out because he'd seen something more interesting than doom. Naruto tilted the canteen to spill the water. His hand didn't move. Show me, Hinata said. She didn't touch him. She didn't have to. He shifted the canteen so she could see. Without the mirror doing what mirrors like to do. She stared. Her eyes didn't flare. She kept them like a late-night lamp. It's a tether, she said. They've anchored their ritual there. Whatever happens at the sea will pull there. Karen's hand was already on his wrist, fingers precise, as if she could cuff his pulse. Do not look directly, she murmured. He's trying to hook you through your own face. Temari saw enough without seeing too much. The line of her jaw hardened. Make your speeches at the fortress, she said into the shadows where she knew someone was listening. You break a V. Yaj because you're scared of your own god story, and Suna will call your fear what it is, a stupid kind of courage that only knows how to destroy. Celine, out beyond the firelight, said nothing. Even her breath went careful. Naruto breathed. The circlet pressed warm against the band. He set the canteen on the ground and pushed a thin skin of stone up through the metal like frost, just the inner surface. A dusting that ate shine without taking function. The mirror died in a small, satisfying way. Water looked like water again. He handed the canteen back to Temari. Tomorrow, he said, NTH. Is time the word felt like stone where you carve a date, not air where you pretend you're brave. We end this at the source. Temari nodded once, satisfied. Hinata's fingers closed around his for the space of 2 heartbeats, warm. Clinically precise, accusing him of nothing, then let go. Karen made a noise that might one day be a laugh, if someone bought it a drink. Finally, Anko said, and flopped. On her back to look at a sky that had decided on full night. A plan I can explain to a snake. Tenten wrote 3 words in her notebook and underlined none of them. Eat the mirrors. Naruto lay on high. Sighed with his hand under his cheek like a child who has learned to pretend that sleeping is a kind of guard. The threads slid, lazy and light, mapping everyone's breaths within reach. He didn't need to watch them to know they were there. The circlet hummed, a low purr that promised nothing but the willingness to consider a better angle. He slept, and dreamed the sound rock makes when it changes its mind. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Angles that shouldn't exist. Ishi no Kagami rose out of the scrub like someone had taught a mesa to stand at attention. It was all honest stone and dishonest edges, LLS cut to a geometry that threw sunlight into tidy stripes and left the rest in thoughtful shadow. Banners snapped. Traders outside pretended not to care who met inside by arguing about dates and salt and whose scale weights lied less. Every gate guard had mad-wrapped pauldrons. It made the place look like a crowd of boulders had voted on a dress code. Temari took point. She didn't ask permission. She moved like wind that had read the schedule and didn't care. The Suna escort flowed with her, ugly men with uninsultable faces and very polished boots. Naruto let his threads slide out underfoot and into the seams, feeling how the fortress wore its history. The stone hummed at his palms. Parades, sieges, a wedding once, poorly timed. A covenant clerk with a scroll case and a mouth that liked saying no stepped into their path. Weapons must be declared at the registry and peace banded, he began, eyes flicking over belts, harnesses, Temari's fan, Naruto's band, pausing a heartbeat too long on Hinata's eyes. 1 beat, not 2. He wanted to act like he wasn't afraid. Naruto, Temari murmured without looking, do the dust thing. He didn't ask what she meant. He lifted his hand into haft of sunlight and pinched the air like he was considering whether to steal it. Dust motes hung there, lazy dancers in a column of light. He feathered his chakra into the smallest of them until the powder was a scatter of stony glitter. Then let go. The motes fell a fraction faster than dust should, made a delicate sound like someone rubbing their fingers together. Harmless. Precise. The clerk swallowed. The word he'd brought to the door, monster, decided to step off the ride and go home. He stepped aside. Registries first on the right, he said stiffly. Don't touch the mirrors. We won't touch your mirrors, Enko said solemnly. We'll just make them cry. Inside was cool and echoing with the hum of voices that thought they were important. Naruto didn't like how the walls bent light. Corridors were built with a mind for parade angles. There were places you could stand and make a small army look enormous, and places you could hide 3 knives in a shadow and make it feel like one. He breathed and let his threads map it 1 grain at a time. The council hall had a long table that claimed neutrality by being ugly and heavy. Around it, Konoha elders with ink on their fingers and opinions on their tongues. Suna officials who wore dust like jewelry, a handful of other villages' representatives, and along the walls, the Aegis Covenant, patient in their mat and their posture and their lot in life. Which was to wait for someone to look into the wrong angle. Perseus IX hadn't arrived. The room held its breath like it expected a sermon. Tamari made a small hand sign, let me, then gave them a public smile that wasn't a smile at all. Before we argue, witnesses should see this. She tipped her head toward Naruto. He stepped up, not grand, just present. The elders cut the eyes up like men who feared theater more than war. Naruto lifted his hand into that high window light again. I can do bad things, he said without making it a promise or a threat. He pinched a fresh handful of floating dust into grit. The motes tapped the table like soft hail, then softened back to dust on the grain. I choose not to unless people are being hurt. He took a breath. We came because people were being hurt. A murmur. One of Konoha's elders, a tidy man whose robes gave him authority that his jaw didn't, said, and you want accommodation. Accuracy, Naruto said. He left it there. He didn't give them more to misquote. He let the dust say the rest. Temari's mouth tipped the smallest degree, you pitched it right. Across from them, Celine leaned on a pillar like consequence had tucked her in for a nap. The talk unfolded like big talk does. Careful words, quiet knives, an agenda written by men who had already eaten. Naruto listened, threads draped down the legs of his chair into the cracks. Reading the room through the way people's feet lied. Hinata watched the sightlines without blinking. Enko watched the watchers and stole 2 sugared nuts off a tray without anyone seeing her do it. Tenten counted mirrors. Karen stood behind Naruto's shoulder, clinically precise as a heartbeat monitor. The Covenant made their pitch obliquely. Registration for Myth Blood, Sigh. DA woman with a black stripe painted from ear to chin, so we can respond to incidents before villages become gardens. She didn't say we will make them gardens if you don't comply. She let the room provide that. We register shinobi, an elder said. He made the syllables at Naruto like maybe they'd stick to him. We can easily. And who holds the registry? Tamari asked pleasantly. You. She shook her head. When we make lists of what we are afraid of, they become shopping lists for the cruel. Murmurs again. Rap of knuckles on a table, quiet. Naruto kept his voice out of the room and his presence in it. He'd learned that in a classroom where talking got you thrown out and showing your work got your homework accepted even if the math was wrong. He caught Hinata's profile in the shadow of a torch, and the shape of her mouth told him he'd found the right kind of silence. At a break, Enko leaned in. Vault under the east wing, she breathed, so casual you'd think she was flirting with the table. Celine's shadow guard has been guarding something they hate. Smells like a device. Tenten. I saw a diagram on the registry clerk's cuff, Tenten murmured. Counter socket. They built a cradle to turn that circlet into a switch. Flip it and you become a weapon with one setting, ruin. Hinata's fingers sketched angles in the air. Root. Tenten's eyes went bright. There's a blind service corridor behind the water room. If someone made a terrific scene at the storeroom, I could climb a pipe, get into the workroom, and swap their cradle for clay with teeth. I have always wanted, Enko said, to make a terrific scene. Quote, do that, Naruto said, and something in his voice made three men glance over like they'd heard a wind shift. Hinata, map me the guard eyes. Karen, I stay with you, Karen said, not looking at him because it would prove more than she was ready for, and I pull your heart back into rhythm if politics make you forget how to breathe. Let's earn our snacks, Tamari said. Standing before the break ended, and people all over the hall got to their feet because tone is a jutsu too. The heist moved like they'd practiced it even though they hadn't. That's at skill looks like. You decide to be practiced and your body believes you. Anko's scene was operatic. She burst into the storeroom and started an argument with a broom, then a man, then the concept of broom ownership. Escalating with such virtuoso nonsense that 3 guards came to see the show and 2 to protect the broom. She called them thieves of dust. She accused a mop of formal betrayal. And they tried to shoo her. She let herself be shooed in 3 different directions at once and somehow arrived exactly where she'd meant all along, with her back to the service corridor in her hand. Flying as if every gesture hosted a curse. Hinata moved through the wash of attention like light through gauze. 1 tap emptied a corridor, 2 touches lidded the eyes of a pair of sentries without sleep, only calm. She kept her voice low, guiding Tenten. Now. Left hand. Pause. Guard turns his head in 3, 2, there. Tenten became an object at rest until time wanted her to move, then she was an arrow. She climbed the pipe with her teeth bared like she was being polite to gravity because they had a history. She slipped into the workroom and set her palms on the table like it might bite her. It tried. The cradle was beautiful in a sterile way. Matte ribs, a hollow for a brow, a lattice of fine channels that hummed with the promise of power they wanted to borrow and spend. She took it in, to her hands and weighed it and hated it. She set it down again, took a clay twin from her pack, soft, matte, carved with runes that looked plausible until you tugged them, and swapped them with the graw. CE of a magician who refuses to lie with his hands. She took the real cradle apart with a wire and a whispered apology to craftsmanship, and fed its best pieces into the mad bag at her hip. She left the clay with teeth. If anyone closed that cradle on a circlet, it would bite its own hinge and pretend to have done its job, then crumble like a bad cookie. Tenten kissed her fingers for luck, not because she believed in gods but because she respected the work. She slipped back into the pipe's throat as Anko's argument with a push broom reached the kind of climax that gets you banned from borrowing cleaning supplies for a year. Hinata caught Tenten's ankle and eased her down at the one angle the corridor would forgive. They were gone before the mop stopped feeling flattered. Back in the hall, the Covenant changed the temperature. You can tell a speech is coming when the room's oxygen empties into the lungs of a man who is not short of breath. Perseus Ninth crossed the threshold like the concept of arrival had dressed in black. His armor dismissed light. He wore the barest outline of a smile, which is how you wear a knife to a family dinner when you're hoping no one makes you use it. Naruto of Konoha, he said. He didn't look around to see whether everybody knew the name. He assumed they did. He assumed you read. You wear a relic that belongs to history. Naruto didn't stand. He lifted his chin just enough to be unambiguous. I wear a limiter because it prevents accidents. You were an accident, an elder murmured, not able to help himself. He wasn't brave. He was small. The room ignored him. Perseus's gaze slid past Hinata the way a river slides past a reed that will cut your ankle if you forget it. He didn't linger for Anko's grin. He looked at Karen like a surgeon looks at a reluctant scalpel. You, Oto property, currently misfiled. Karen tucked a lock of hair behind her ear as if that had always been her uniform. I refiled myself. Proper forms will arrive late. Perseus didn't move. The light around him did. Sightlines in the room kinked. Naruto felt a tug on his threads as if someone had plucked his hair. He didn't look. He felt the angle at Karen's shoulder thinned. Oh, and then she was 2 steps to the right without having crossed the space between. A folded plane, a pocket of here nested inside a slice of there. By the time anyone realized, Perseus had his fingers at her wrist like he was demonstrating a pressure point for a class. Walk with me, he said softly. Or be carried like an object. Try, Karen said, not softly, and stabbed for his eye with a finger. He didn't flinch. The room flinched for him, every line bending to make her strike arrive an inch short. Her hand hit air and the air hit back, soft as a cushion, humiliating. Naruto stood in one motion. The chair didn't scrape. Let her go. Perseus didn't. He didn't tighten either. He was a study in middle pressure. Your village will not survive stubbornness, he said to the room, but his eyes were on Naruto. Which made it personal. We break what you love to prevent what you will become. Then try, Temari said, stepping like a doorway into the space. But do it on the ramparts where the wind can judge you. They went to the ramparts. People like to say they didn't run because it sounds dignified. They ran. Naruto's heart knocked twice into his throat and then settled. Because Karen's fingers were bone on his pulse, counting, forgiving, accusing, guiding. The courtyard unrolled like a mat and the stairs charged them a minor toll. The sky outside was an honest blue. It did not promise fairness. Perseus moved without hurry. He kept Karen between the idea of escape and the need to demonstrate control. The Covenant fanned in their places along the wall. Selene's place was halfway between signal and surrender. She stayed there. Terms, Perseus said when the rampart wind had found everyone's balance. Bring the head to sea and we empty your village of danger. Refuse, and we garden. No, Naruto said. He didn't yell it. He offered it to the wind for distribution. We don't trade children for calm. Perseus's face made a minute movement that could have been respect or heartburn. He loosened his fingers a fraction on Karen's wrist and then tightened them again. Demonstration, not mercy. Then we test. The world shivered. Not the world. The plains. The ramp. Art's stones doubled and then rejoined from a new angle. Naruto's threads slipped and caught. The Aegis release folded space and kept a ledger. Blows owed and blows collected with interest. He'd seen the smaller trick with Selene. This was the doctrine. He took the chain of his circlet in one hand. It wasn't long. It wasn't meant to be used as a weapon. Good. He liked using the wrong tool and making it right by the way he held it. He stepped forward like a man offering to help you lift a couch you shouldn't have bought. Perseus turned his slight smile on him, and then Karen vanished. Not vanished. Bent through. Naruto felt her through his thread like a plucked line falling slack. He didn't look. He moved into the space her absence made, because men like Perseus always expect you to reach foe. Are what you lost and that's when they cut you. He spun the circlet's chain once, twice, letting it drink a basilisk pulse like water wicking into rope, and snapped it hard into the hinge of Nowhere. T had just opened next to Perseus's shoulder. Metal kissed nothing and the nothing complained. A seam flashed. Perseus's eyes flicked the first time. He let go of Karen, not because he wanted to but because he had to. Thank you, Karen told Breath, stupid Breath, and dropped into a crouch at Naruto's side with unsentimental efficiency. She didn't shake. Professionals shake later where no one can see. Perseus banked a stored strike. Naruto watched it happen by the way air thickened to either side of him. Then the punch came from behind, the room paying out a deposit the man hadn't made. It hit Naruto between the shoulder blades and would have folded him if he hadn't already laid a skin of crumbling stone there, pumice-light and brittle. The blow broke the skin into dust and the dust fell and got in his mouth. And he coughed and laughed because it tasted like getting away with something. Hinata's voice was a thin wire through noise. Opaque, she said, and Naruto felt the word before it hit his ear. Her eyes saw what his threads couldn't. A moment when Perseus's barrier wasn't folding but solid. Not invulnerable. Present. Temari read the word from Hinata's mouth and the air bent to her like it had been waiting. She swung her fan and threw a slice of wind not as a blade but as a fault finder. It slid into the barrier and made the planes misbehave, rattling their perfect angles into jigsaw teeth for a breath. Tenten's harpoon sang. The tie head struck a seam and blossomed into non-reflective crystal, ugly and useful, anchoring a line like a hand jammed into a closing door. Anko's smoke rolled up and in. A matte fog with poison in it that made mirrored surfaces cough on their own spit. You can't reflect what you can't stomach. Perseus finally looked all the way at Naruto. You were undisciplined, he said. Like someone giving a lecture in a storm and expecting you to take notes. I learned from the wind, Naruto said, and drove a basilisk pulse through the chain into the anchor Tenten had set. It hummed, and the hum went ugly. It turned into a feedback whine that a tuned thing makes when you've forced it a hair off its perfect pitch. Perseus's stance broadened without him meaning to. He planted his feet because the angle he loved had decided to cheat on him with chaos. Stored strike, Hinata warned, and the world agreed. It came like a train forgotten on a track none of them had laid. A slab of force that wanted Naruto to understand consequence. He didn't try to be stone this time. He hardened the air into a honeycomb in front of him, brittle as spun sugar. The blow hit, shattered 3 layers, slowed, and dispersed in a glitter of dust and a sound like a sigh leaving a room where a fight just ended. People on the wall made a noise you hear it plays when the actor doesn't die on cue. 2 Covenant frontliners rushed to fill the gap. Naruto turned, took their wrists in his hands, and froze their blade hands to mat in a bracer, not bone. They twitched, tried for knees. He hardened their ankles to the rampart with grit exactly thicker than patience and then looked up at the crowd who had come to watch the god blood be scary. He raised both hands, showed his palms. Witness, he said to the wind, and threw it to the people who needed a line to repeat later. He put his fingertips to the first operative's wrist and warmed the stone there back to skin. Slow enough for everyone to see the creep of grain reversing. The man jerked, breath back. He did the other, then released their ankles with a roughness that was mercy disguised as annoyance. He stepped back. Tamari said, loud enough. Konoha shows restraint. She didn't add because we intend to live with ourselves later. She didn't need to. Perseus reset his planes. The angle of him changed a hair, the kind of change men make when something they believed unshakable gets a crack you have to keep your fingers off. His voice came more precise. You will choose wrong, boy. And then I will use your choice to teach this world a lesson it won't misplace. Maybe, Naruto said, because honesty costs less than pretending. But not today. Celine's mouth twitched in a way that, in a different life, might have been a smile. The Covenant along the walls shifted their feet like people who wanted to go back to the simpler fight where you throw a blade and it sticks or doesn't. Perseus flicked High's hand and the planes peeled back from him to ordinary air. The rampart relaxed, stones easing their shoulders like men getting out of jackets. He didn't step closer or farther. At dusk, he said, we convene again. Bring your village's decision makers. They like the taste of fear, let them have a meal. Do that, Tamari said, and there was a woman's laugh buried in it that had nothing to do with joy. Perseus turned his head toward Karen without giving the gesture the dignity of a full look. You let yourself be stolen. If that saved even one child, I will adjust my ledger. Throw your ledger into the sea, Karen said, exhausted, and knuckled sweat off her brow like a person whose hands always found the one honest thing in the room. The crowd didn't disperse because crowds need to be told. Naruto didn't want to be the one to do the telling, so he did something easier and harder. He helped a man button his sleeve with fingers that had gone dumb from fear. He handed a woman her dropped sandal. He stood where people could decide to feel safe or not. He didn't push. That was when the runner hit the rampart steps wrong, almost fell, caught himself on the second try because Shinobi Lee RN that move the first week and never forget it. He had blood on his shoulder and the look of a man who has run out of words but still needs to communicate. He found Naruto with that desperate akarak. Why messengers get after the first 1,000 deliveries. Konoha, he said, and swallowed because you shouldn't have to say it like a question. The orphanage, sleepers, reflections waking in the walls. Ivy moving like a hand. The fortress wall across from them breathed. Not truly, but the light on it yanked sideways and, in the new angle, the stone wore the ghost of a hall none of them had ever visited. Water pushed against pillars. Bronze discs freckled a ceiling that had learned to breathe. A set of steps led down. Naruto felt his threads pull tight to that image the way a body answers its name. The overlay settled like a map pinned on another map. He saw the orphanage's back gate kept inside the sea temple's stair. Bring the head to sea, a voice said, not out loud, never out loud, always out loud. The rampart's shadow deepened. People shuddered without knowing their bodies were allowed to. Perseus didn't move. He didn't have to. He had the look of a man whose scenario had just landed on the exact line where he'd underlined a word, leverage. Anko breathed out a curse and then bit the end off because there were kids in earshot. Tenten's hand closed over her bolt harness like she was tempted to build a new sky. Karen dug nails into her palm and came away with half-moon crescents, bright and human. Hinata looked at Naruto. He didn't look back. He felt her eyes the way you feel a hand at your shoulder in a dark room when someone who knows you is telling you that you're not alone. Dusk, Perseus repeated, as if any of them still cared about the schedule. Do try to come to a thoughtful decision. Naruto swallowed once. The circlet's weight sat at his brow, patient, ready to be the worst tool or the best. He let the image on the wall finish breathing. Then he folded the chain into his palm and spoke to Temari without moving his mouth any more than a necessary word demands. We end this at the source. Temari's hand tightened on the fan. Good, she said. I read of their angles in rooms built for speeches. Celine's eyes tracked the ghost on the wall, then Naruto. She gave the smallest nod a hunter gives to a quarry that insists on running into the teeth rather than away from them. Respect. Not approval. They moved before Sense could ask for a vote. Tenten pointed at a storage tower with a busted lamp. Workshop, she said. Give me 20 minutes and 2 men who don't mind being ropes. Take 4, Temari said. We'll buy time the way sand buys time, by getting into everything. Hinata fell in beside Naruto. She didn't ask if he was ready. She adjusted the band at his brow by a finger width, the kind of intimate correction you can make in public when the person you touch has accepted your logic as part of their heartbeat. Karen drifted to his other side and checked his pulse with 3 fingertips and 0 apology. Anko walked backward for 6 steps, glaring at everyone who needed it. Tenten jogged away, already stripping a gear bag with her teeth. Leader, Anko said, not singing it this time. We going to see? Yeah, Naruto said, and we're taking the fortress with us. Temari laughed once. Now that, she said, is choreography I can sell to a council. The ghost water on the wall rolled. The orphanage gate offered a hinge where none existed. Naruto breathed like a boy who had learned to be quiet in halls and now was going make a lot of noise in the right place. He touched the stone parapet, left it a whisper of grit like a promise, and turned toward the stair with his team falling into step around him like a solution the day had been waiting for. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Sea Temple That Breathed. The storm rolled in like someone had yanked the horizon closer. Wind shouldered the scrub flat. Rain raked the plain into sliding slate. Temari cut a corridor through it, the big fan thumping a low rhythm every time she opened it. Boom, 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 like knocking on a door that the sky didn't own. The coastline was not a line so much as a handful of broken teeth. The temple lived past them, under the skin of the sea, where the water thickened to the texture of old glass. You could see the steps only when the lightning remembered to show them. You could feel them all the time. Naruto tightened the circlet against the band by a fraction, enough to make the hum nestle into his jaw. His threads slid out, caught water, stone, and the way everything shook, and mapped the angles the storm couldn't blur. Hinata touched his sleeve twice. Ready, with you, and then went still enough that rain avoided her. Anko strode ahead as though the night had a bar tab and owed her. 2 snakes unspooled from her sleeves and tasted the air. They didn't bolt. They drew a lazy S toward a shadow where the cliff had been chewed into a mouth. Gate, Anko said, and then, in a voice that sat halfway between a dare and a lullaby, she spoke a handful of syllables that were older than shinobi and younger than cruelty. The rock hissed. Not open, not welcome. But a surrender you can respect. A seam widened into stairs pressed with scale patterns worn down by feet that weren't human. Temari checked the way the wind inside moved. It moved rightly, if that word fits stone. Don't shine anything, Tenten said, patting her gear as if it might leap in joy and kill them. If you see your face where it doesn't belong, spit on it. Only, you could make survival advice sound like workshop etiquette, Anko said, and then ducked as a curl of spray took a swipe. They went down. Water made sound in pockets. The steps wanted you to rush. Their pitch was eager. Naruto slowed. He let his hand skim the wall and left a whisper of grit, the kind that kills glide without scarring what holds you up. His threads tasted coins embedded in the mortar. Not coins. Discs. Bronze. Dull. Freckling the curve of the corridor like a constellation you forgot but recognize when named. Celine's voice slipped along the stone from somewhere not far. Don't get sentimental, she advised the dark. It eats that first. I thought you didn't do tips, Anko called back without looking. I hate busywork, Celine said. Pull your boy out if he starts being art. Hinata didn't turn. He won't. The first hull pushed back at lungs. Not with stink. With pressure. The runes inlaid along the baseboards glowed the way embers think. The ceiling dipped enough to. A tall man would bow and lie to himself that he meant to. The floor was alive with the scale tiles Naruto had learned to feel. He spread threads in a fan and made them hum just off the rune's pitch. The place liked honesty but didn't trust confidence. He kept his heart quiet and his feet without swagger, and it let their weight sit. Ahead, the sound changed. Water without water. The hush of a room holding its breath for a performance. A threshold flared, low and wide. Tempered light rolled over them, refracting through surfaces that were not mirrors and behaving like them anyway. They enter. D in a line anyone could read. Wind first, then calm eyes, then bad jokes with a knife in them. Naruto took the middle. He preferred being where he could catch anything falling apart. The chamber beyond wasn't grand. Long rather than tall. Ribs of stone rising along the walls like the inside of a creature choosing not to digest you yet. A walkway ran the length, flanked by 2 channels. They were full of water that was not moving and moved all the same. Platforms, glossy as shells, slid along the channels like thinking. Causeways, Tenten murmured, half delighted, half furious. Rotating on a rhythm that doesn't match ours. Match theirs, then, Hinata said, eyes flaring. She watched the microscopic hesitations, the sweetheart stutters where the platforms kissed their pivots. 3 step, pause, 2, skip, back. If you lose time, you'll get flung. Tamari, Naruto said. She didn't need more. She sent a thin fan of wind along the channels, not to push, but to let the platforms feel a pressure that wasn't them. They steadied. Not much. Enough. Anko tossed a smoke capsule ahead, not for cover, but to dull the slick. Tenten fired 2 lines into the ceiling ribs and made a moving handhold path. They crossed in a rhythm no school teaches. Hinata calling the microbeats, Tamari breathing at the margins, Naruto adjusting the rune's pitch with threads like a bassist keeping a drummer honest. 2/3 through. A platform stuttered off cycle. Tenten's cord teeth dug. The platform squealed. The room frowned. Naruto felt his pulse scatter toward ugly cold and pulled it back against T. He circled like reining a horse that doesn't want to end a run. Karen's fingers, light at his wrist, counted, 1 2, enough for him to catch the stutter and make it a step. They reached the end with dignity intact, which matters when a building is judging you. The door there didn't open so much as decide it was a door again, stone side, and the seam unlocked. Everything in here, Anko said, has better posture than I do. Everything in here, Karen said, has been waiting too long. The next room went underwater without flooding. The light thinned. Sound got thick. Every word came out half a beat after you wanted it. Carvings along the wall. Women with hair like currents, children in their arms, a hand raised in warning that was also protection. Naruto kept his eyes at a slit and let his threads do the majority of seeing. They quivered with memory not his. A brazier in the center filled itself with water and offered a film. Not a mirror. A skin where images walked if you let them. They walked. Scenes rose like breath on cold. A woman with a wide mouth set as if she had to hold back speech to stop the world tipping. Her hair alive but not cruel, people coming to her with fear and leaving with something else. The first man with an angled shield sneaking into the hall like a question that wanted to be an answer. No speech. No captions. Naruto watched. He didn't defend anyone in his head. The room didn't force you to pick a side. It forced you to notice you already had one. Do I need to stab the water? Anko asked, because she should. She didn't, yet. Naruto let one thread dangle into the basin. The water didn't try to take his hand off through his hair. Progress. It pulsed once with a signature he knew because he had lived under it. A lullaby with grit in it and a warning with love in it. He accepted the pulse, returned it smaller, then withdrew. Root forward, Tenten said softly, because eventually human business must continue. Hinata traced the seam in the far wall with her gaze and nodded. Naruto reached and told the stone, "We've seen enough." It agreed. The seam cracked in a line that used to be a river and now was a door. Air sharpened. The sea's breath became a blade. They stepped onto a balcony, and the temple showed them its chest. The hall dropped away into an amphitheater of steps that sank and sank until the black water claimed them. Pillars rose, like tree trunks that had decided to stand upside down. Bronze discs speckled the ceiling, and each wore a matte scab where Tenten would have liked to make a mark of her own. Across the bowl, on a dais that didn't reflect, Perseus stood with one hand at his side and the other resting on a thing that had not been there in any of the ghosts, a shield with a dead shine and a hungry center. Behind him, the temple's logic had gathered itself into something tall. If a colossus could breathe, this one was holding its breath for applause. Konoha, Perseus said. The storm put punctuation on his tone. You're prompt. Tamari stepped to the railing. Suna came too. You'll find that inconvenient. Wind is always inconvenient to planes, Perseus said, and then his gaze slid over the group and settled on Naruto's circlet with the concentration of a craftsman who had found the flaw in an otherwise perfect piece. You brought it. I brought restraint, Naruto said. He kept the chain coiled. He kept his pulse at a steady hum even as it wanted to leap. He felt the tether in the angle of the air, the way the orphanage gate leaned invisible and heavy on the edge of this room, wanting whatever happened here to happen there. He tasted chalk. He thought of kids arguing about a ball not being out. Perseus lifted the shield. The center was a disc pressed with a woman's mouth almost speaking. It wasn't the face from the shrine. It was a computation pretending to be history. Give me the head, he said almost gently. I'll make a tool. I'll break the world cleanly, in the right places, so the rest can stay unbroken. Or you could leave, Anko offered. We could get noodles. You look like a man who says no to carbs when he shouldn't. Perseus's smile tilted a millimeter. He turned without telly, graphing and touched the shield to a pillar. Stone went grained, then glassy, then a statue of itself. The pillar held. It would hold for centuries. Decisions are carb-free, he said. They go down easy. Their consequences don't. Naruto stepped to the lip of the balcony. Hinata, he said softly. I have the angles, she murmured. You're left. You're 6. The floor changes 1 degree at the 3rd step. Don't plant there, Tenten, Naruto said. She had the harpoon loaded on a line that had once been used to pull down a training dummy and now won't admit it. 2-stage anchor. If the planes fold on me, it'll stick in whatever reality they decide is real that second. That's not a promise. It's a dare. Anko. Smoke that makes mirrors sick, she said, and a prayer to snakes that sounds like a joke so they won't take advantage. Karen set 2 fingers to the skin at his wrist and 1 to the tendon inside his elbow. When you feel the pull to ugly, think of the orphanage fence. I'll hook your rhythm there. You'll feel it like a heartbeat in your palm. Tamari. Win, she said, because wind is done with speeches when the blade is ready. Perseus didn't attack. He adjusted the room, which is worse. The steps shifted their opinion of friction. The discs bloomed light that wasn't bright and was everywhere. The colossus breathed in. Naruto tilted his head until his hair fell like a curtain. Threads poured out. They kissed every surface that didn't shine. They refused to learn any name the planes offered and used the one the rock had whispered outside instead. He didn't take the stairs. He took the ribs. Sliding down stone turned to rough skin by a light touch of veil. Tamari shaved the incoming glare off the air. Hinata's voice marked seams like someone calling turns in a waltz. Now, wait, now. Naruto moved in that beat as if it were his. Tenten's harpoon thumped and the crystal blossomed on contact, ugly, honest. Anko's smoke rolled and sucked silver out of the air. Perseus stepped forward on a floor that was his idea. He launched a blow he hadn't thrown yet. It arrived from the left, a stored insult the day owed Naruto from a moment he hadn't lived. In's fingers pinched his wrist in 2 little pulses. The fence at the orphanage clicked into place in his blood as if memory were a nail. He hardened the air into a lattice-like bones arranged by someone who respected bodies. The blow shattered 3 cells, bled into grit, and fell harmless. Naruto hit the dais and slid, thread barefoot shore. He snapped the circlet chain out, letting it drink a basilisk pulse. And he didn't aim for Perseus's face because that's for men who want to be congratulated later. He aimed for the corner hinge where the planes had to go somewhere. The chain kissed the seam. The seam squealed. Perseus's shield rotated to catch the angle and reflect it back. Hinata didn't shout. She said one word. Down. Naruto dropped. The reflected pulse took a bite out of the disc above him, which coughed, not glass. Not stone. Something caught in its throat, and stopped being part of the mirror ecosystem for a breath. Tenten's second line fired. The anchor bloomed in the wound. The plane sputtered, trying to decide which reality it was hired for. For a moment, it did both. Tamari drove a crosswind at the indecision, so it had to make up its mind or lose face. It chose wrong. Good. Perseus flowed into a new angle and pulled a handful of stored motion like a gambler yanking chips. 3 blows came in a braid from 3 places he had been. Naruto's threads sang their path half a second ahead. A violin strings warning. He hardened the floor into a rumpled skin with ridges where a flat blade hates to sit. The first blow skipped. The second shivered. The third caught him in the hip. Dull through the bandage of veil he'd laid there, and he stepped into it so it spent itself on the stone of him instead of the meat. He grunted. He stayed up. More, Perseus said, as if disappointed that the lecture would take longer. Anko's smoke pulsed darker. She hissed a word at the house snakes that the temple had carved in its ribs, and, for once, they listened to a human because she spoke without groveling. Poison roped into the intake valves of the planes. Mirrors don't like to be nauseated. Reflection got clumsy. The Colossus finished its inhale. The room tilted toward ovation. A limb rose from the water. Not arm, not leg, plain made weight and hunger. It moved to make everything one angle. Tamari, Naruto breathed. She slammed her fan. Wind turned inside out for a hear. Chi beat and laced itself into the Colossus's joint like silk rope set on fire. It didn't stop the limb. It made the limb articulate, and articulation needs timing, and timing you can rob. Naruto dropped his chin. The band slid, and his hair spilled more thread than he had ever bled without thinking. The circlet hummed at his brow. The Hall pressed power into his palm because the tether wanted to go home, wanted to go back to Konoha and finish a hostage-taker's sentence. He didn't give it that. Anchor me, he told Karen, and he felt her through his pulse like a sensible answer. He gathered the veil, not as a gaze, not as a curse. As a blanket, as a skin he could throw over a thing to keep it from being a weapon for a breath. He looked. He didn't look, he aimed with threads and memory. He cast the veil at the Colossus's limb and told it, with all the Uzumaki stubbornness he'd inherited from people who built villages by carrying buckets, stop wanting. Stone creeped, not over flesh, over angles, over the idea that you have to be a blade. The limb slowed enough for Tenten's anchor to find a tendon. It sank, it held. The limb met the floor with an earthquake's suggestion rather than promise. Perseus saw his doctrine misbehave. His mouth thinned. He brought the shield up. The disc in the center brightened with a dead shine. He meant to cash the temple's old debt in one throw. Don't you dare, Hinata said. And the resonance in the words was not chakra and not shout. It was the tone people use when you step too close to a child. It carried. Perseus threw anyway, and Naruto did the thing. No one had asked for because he wanted it. He reached for the shield in passing and stole it. Not from Perseus's hand, from the idea of reflection. He gripped the disc that had pretended to be Histor. Why and snapped the hunger off it the way you break ice from a well with the right smack. The temple groaned like a ship. He had the head for a breath, a face that was an argument masquerading as a tool. He could have pointed it at a man and become myth. He didn't. He pressed the disc to the circlet at his brow and made the two wrong things argue with each other until they softened. He added a third wrong thing, his band's dirty cloth. The pilled weave that had drunk too much night. He held all three until they remembered they wanted to be useful more than right. The metal changed under his fingers. Not to shine, to purpose. The thing in his hand took the shape of a shield with an angle that did not send harm back to faces. It gathered the veil's creeping mercy and locked it into a rule: petrify weapons, not people. Break blades, spare bone. Borrowed God. Tamari breathed, and there was respect under the salt. Perseus drove the last stored strike at him because systems do what they are made to do when they're breaking. Naruto lifted the new shield. The blow hit. The shield drank the angle, ate the hunger, and flashed it out into the air as a shutter that turned every blade within 10 paces to a chalky stiffness and left the hands that held them alive and furious and uncut. Silence made a shape. Then it cracked. Then the room did what crowds do when a script ends wrong. Nothing, because they didn't know what to do instead of clapping. Perseus stood in a geometry suddenly full of edges that weren't obeying. He kept his chin level. His eyes shifted once, finally, toward the basin's old ghosts. Whatever he saw there came out not as penance but as a recalculation. He took a step. The plane under him jittered and then decided to hold. Naruto lowered the shield. He could have thrown mercy like a brag. He could have grinned at the man and asked whether the lesson tasted like carb-free regret. He did something unforgivable instead. He let Perseus see him with the simplest face he had. The one you wear when you are a boy from the leaf and you want people to be alright and you're stubborn about it. I'm going to unpetrify my home, Naruto said. I'm going to break your tether. I'm going to leave you alive because I want you to see how to finish a story different. Perseus's jaw flexed on the smallest word he'd allow himself. Why? Because I saw her, Naruto said, and rked his chin at the basin the way men point at shrines when they don't want to kneel. And because you want to be right more than you want to be kind and you're wrong about which one outlives the other. He turned from the dais before the scene could calcify into something they'd all regret. The tether tugged. Karen's fingers tightened. Gate, she said. Give me your hand. He gave it. She cut his skin with a precise swipe, not deep. Just a notch, and smeared the blood on the shield's inner rim. She hooked his pulse to the orphanage's fence like stitching skin to skin. Hinata folded her hand over theirs and laid the Byakugan's quiet sight along the line like a light laid under a sheet. Ready, Hinata said. Temari raised the fan. Tenten braced the line. Anko smiled at a god and meant it. Naruto stepped, not body, not thread, into the tether, through the angle of the air where the orphanage's gate had insisted on being a hinge in a sea temple's wall. The hall spit him where he needed to wet stone becoming dry, step becoming familiar cobble. Ivy moved on the back wall like hair on a living thing. Faces in the brick, caught mid-breath, mid-cry, mid-sleep, dimpled the air. He lifted the shield and pressed it flat against the gate. The metal hummed, hungry for work and told it could have the right kind. He pushed the veil into the ivy, not at the eyes, not at the mouths, at the places where weaponry had been braided. The tendrils that had bound wrists, the knots around ankles, the stony crust on a throne rock a child had left, half hidden. Just this, he told it. Only this. He felt the pull to grand gesture surge up his arm and told it no, like you tell your own temper to sit when it wants to run. Karen's binding on his pulse held. Hinata's sight laid a safe path like footprints in snow. The shield's hum sharpened to a pitch he had learned in the shrine, a note that meant patience, and then the stone began to go backward. One by one, the crusts on weapons cracked into dust. The ivy softened into plants again and decided it preferred the honest work of climbing to the ambitious work of strangling. The faces in the wall stayed walls until they weren't faces anymore. They were bricks. Bricks are not people. Bricks are good. He went along the wall, steady as a man untying 1,000 threads in the back of a dress someone else had misbuttoned. Kids who had been crouched behind barrels took shuddering breaths. No one clapped. It would have been rude. One boy said, too loud because he had been quiet too long, we were going to hit the mirror with a broom. Good plan, Naruto said. Brooms are undervalued. Quote, he did the front yard and the side stairs and the place under the kitchen eaves where paint liked to peel and had been stopped mid-peel. He did the last of the gate. When he was done, he leaned the shield against the doorpost like a tool finished for the moment. The metal dimmed its hum to a purr you felt through floorboards rather than heard. He breathed. He wasn't ready for the way the air tasted like the first rain after a bad summer. He kept his hands open and empty, not because he expected anyone to need proof he wasn't going to touch them wrong, but because he liked how that felt. Back in the sea temple, the line slackened. Temari took a breath as precise as a cut and smiled like wind does when it pulls a banner loose and no one sees it happen. Tenten hissed through her teeth in the way of a person who has watched a gamble work and knows they'd be unbearable if it hadn't. Anko whooped once like she had gotten away with a crime she wasn't sorry for. Perseus had not moved to strike while Naruto walked the tether. He could have. He didn't. He watched the shield dim. He watched the room remember something older than his doctrine. The Colossus exhaled. Selene, from the ribs. rolled her head against the stone. Well, she said, I will be very bored at work tomorrow. Perseus let his swordsmen lower their dead blades. His face didn't unspool, he didn't do theatrics. The tether is cut, he said, like a man giving himself bad news neutrally. He lifted his hand. The planes around him peeled off and laid themselves down like dogs that H. Avenue been told they are not the strongest thing in the house. He could have reached for a new line to dig in. He could have shouted about gods and monsters and the duty of men who know angles. He did nothing smaller. He nodded once to Naruto, an acknowledgement as precise as a receipt. You have delayed tragedy, he said. You have not ended it. Most days, Tamari said, delaying tragedy is called governance. Perseus's mouth twitched. It wasn't humor. It was the edge of a surrender. Celine, he said. She hopped down like this was a training hall and they were late for dinner. You want me to argue with him until he quits breathing. He'll out-talk me, she said. Also, I like my face the way it is. No, Perseus said. Stand down. Celine bowed at a lazy angle. It wasn't disrespect. It was honest. Perseus turned his head toward Naruto. Not full on. Never that, but enough. If you build another doctrine, don't forget that the people who will live under it prefer rice to sermons. Naruto nodded. I'll try to cook more than I talk. Anko snorted. We'll see. The temple sighed like an old book closing. Water crept back into places it had been given permission to wander. The bronze discs dulled, relieved. The pillars looked less like choices and more like rock again. Naruto slid the shield onto his back. It rode the curve of his shoulders as if it had been meant to sit there for a while. And he liked that because some tools have to learn their owners instead of the other way around. They left by the stairs that had been waiting to be exit steps all night. Outside, the storm had walked off to irritate someone else. Stars hooked themselves back into the sky in unconvincing handfuls. Tamari blew hair out of her eyes and flicked a line of damp sand off her sleeve. Tenten pulled a mirror shard from a pouch, chalked on it "Do not polish" in capital letters that dared anyone to mess with her humor, and tucked it away like you keep a memento of a fight that didn't go all the way bad. At the village, the orphanage kids were already hunting brooms to put back where they belonged with the solemnity of second chances. Naruto left the shield propped against the gate for a breath, and then reluctantly brought it with him because you don't leave a thing like that outside just because you wish the world were simpler. Tamari wrote a commendation that would make a council cough if they read it aloud. Enko called Naruto brat, so fondly it sounded like a medal. Karen, who had promised herself not to be anyone's, sat on the orphanage steps and watched him unpetrify a watering can he'd missed, then grunted. Acceptable, which in her language meant, I stayed because you turned out to be worth my energy, do not waste me. Hinata sat with Naruto on a bench that still remembered. A child's initials scratched under the armrest. The lantern above them sputtered and then settled into a glow like it would keep a secret all night if asked properly. They didn't say the big things. He watched the street decide to be ordinary again. His hand found the seam of her sleeve where it wore thin because she used it. You listen to my down, she said finally. I like where your down puts me, he answered. She didn't blush. She smiled the smile she earned. He took the band off then, just for a minute, not to prove anything, just because the night was theirs. He didn't look at any reflection. He looked at a village that had been almost art and had decided to be mess instead, and he loved it for that. Celine slid past the gate, a shadow apologizing for nothing. She tipped 2 fingers to her temple. Try not to make me come back for work, she said. Try not to make me steal your toys, Tenten called from the stoop. I'll send you a catalog, Celine said, and disappeared in to a geometry that had returned to the rude habit of being plain distance. Morning found the river pretending nothing had happened and the monument's faces worn the same old patience. Tenten hung a all sign in her workshop, eat the mirrors. Karen put a line through Odo on a page in her pocket and didn't write anything else where the line had been. Temari's message writers went out, kicking dust into civic conversations across borders. Naruto carried the shield on 2 patrols and then learned to leave it wrapped because a tool that sits on your back too long starts thinking it's you. He was not a shield. He was a boy who had turned a head into one and then chose to put it down. When night came the second time, the sea temple, far away, exhaled one last breath. Somewhere beyond Suna, a ruin, where desert had cauterized a city, licked its lips. In the lightless heart of it, a bowl of obsidian sighed and showed a shape that was neither sword nor shield, neither god nor man. It was an angle learning to be a mouth. Konoha's lanterns bobbed along the river like little planets negotiating orbit. Naruto sat his shield under his bed because that's where boys from the leaf put their dangerous things. Between a futon and 2 drawers of clothes. He slept like someone who had been called a monster and had chosen to be human all day on purpose. His hair lay quiet. His threads hummed a lullaby he'd picked up in stone. In the morning, the bench remembered the weight of 2 people not speaking and practiced for more. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Mouth in the Desert. Morning in the leaf felt like a held note finally allowed to fade. The smell of damp wood from last night's rain. Chalk dust under small hands where kids had redrawn hopscotch boxes and argued about rules without weaponizing it. Naruto sat on the training field's low rail with the shield across his knees and the circlet warm at his brow, working his pulse like a craftsman testing a plane. Feather, back, feather again. The trick was less power and more aim. You could split a hair with a whisper if the whisper knew where to go. Hinata watched his hands without hovering. Lower your thumb, she said finally, and her voice pushed the air a degree closer to right. He adjusted. The basilisk pulse stayed in the meat of his palm where it belonged instead of sneaking up his ring finger's bone like bad gossip. He was about to thank her when the hawk clapped air over their heads and landed on the rail uninvited. Sand spilled from the canister at its leg, dark grains that didn't shine. They felt wrong before you named why. Temari's ribbon of script snapped tight between Naruto's fingers when he tugged the seal. Wind casualties minimal, outpost lost. A bowl of black glass opened its mouth in the ruins east of Kagero. It eats light and names. Bring your angle killer. Bring your eyes. Bring that stubborn mercy. The sand at their feet didn't reflect the morning. You couldn't see yourself in it even if you wanted to. Karen walked up with a half-peeled apple and didn't bite it when the hair rose along her forearms. It subtracts, she said, clinical soft. That's not shadow. It's appetite. Anko slid in on the last word, twirling a kunai that had seen better polish. I love a breakfast invitation that uses the word appetite, she said. I hate a thing that eats its own reflection and asks for seconds. Tenten leaned out of her workshop door with a pencil stuck in her bun and grease on her thumb. The sign she'd nailed above the frame read "Eat the mirrors" in neat letters. She saw the sand, swore low, and disappeared inside, emerging with a satchel that clacked. Dull clay pellets, matte mesh, and a coil of cord studded with rough, ceramic beads. Scatter nets, she said. If it eats light, make it chew grit until it chokes. They were on the road before Naruto had time to finish whatever he'd been thinking about: gratitude and routine. The shield rode easy across his back like it had learned his walk. The band at his eyes felt less like a blindfold and more like a promise to be careful. Hinata kept to his left. Karen took his right and complained about sand before they had even hit sand. Anko flirted with the wind. Tenten counted gear and half-taunted gravity. The rhythm reassembled itself around the new thing, which is a kind of hope if you squint. They met Temari at a way station half-eaten by dunes. She looked like she'd slept in the saddle and won the argument anyway. K's cage sent scouts, she said without drama. They forgot what they were called before they lost blood. Not who they were, what to answer to when someone said their name. We can work with bruised bodies. We can't work with stolen names. Naruto rubbed 2 fingers along the rail and left it a breath of grit. We'll give them back, he said. Temari's gaze snagged a moment on the shield. Or we'll break the bowl so it stops asking, she said. She pivoted. Command gentle and absolute. We take the long ridge. Tenten, I want scatter nets prepped. Hinata, watch the shimmer where heat should be. Karen, you tell me if any one of us starts feeling thin. Anko, say you want jokes under pressure. Don't lick anything, Temari finished. The desert argued with their lungs and then forgot to. Wind razored the tops of dunes into hard white shoulders. The sun looked interested in what they were doing but not enough to help. They found the ruin by how everything around it tried to look like something else. The city had been half unearthed by time and then decided it was tired of being discovered. Blocks of obsidian, showed between slumps of sand like bones insisting they were art. A caravan lay with its wheels at wrong angles and its mules refusing to be convinced by anything. The men weren't dead. They were dead in the way that made you want to call their names to see if the silence broke. Naruto crouched, threads humming out of his hair and into the cart wood. He felt the grain's memory jostle, curse, heat. Then a softness where the voice of the driver had been and wasn't anymore. Don't say his name, Karen murmured, fingers hovering over the man's throat without touching. You'll put a hook in something that wants lines. Okay, Naruto said, and touched the driver's hand instead. Warm. He ran a fine pulse through the palm, not to bind but to wake. The man's eyes opened the way a room opens when someone lights a candle. He squinted at Naruto's face and didn't know what to call it. Panic did a small, horrible roll in Naruto's ribs. He pushed warmth through the fingers, steady as a drum up a hill. You're all right, he said. Not as a trick. I know you know your own life. The word will come back. The driver stared at his own knuckles like they might give him the hint. Something softened. Bread, he said, relieved and ridiculous. My wife gives me the heel. I like the heel. He blinked, and the thread of who he thought he was tugged at the right piece of the weave. He made a noise that might turn into a laugh later. Name, he added. The shape formed on his tongue like a child's first word after a storm. Saeed. There you are, Naruto said, and meant it. Hinata's hand brushed his elbow. The bowl, she murmured. Under the plaza. Tamari set a palm to the breeze like you test soup without getting burned. It's making a vent, she said. We go down and go wrong. Wind will take our words and give us back quiet. Only fair I take my own advice, Anko said, and wrapped a strip of cloth across her eyes, knotting it with one hand. No licking, no looking. Tenten, give me a net. If I get eaten, haul me back by my pride. Can't believe that's strong enough, Tenten said, hooking a clip to Anko's belt. They dropped into the plaza ruin by a stair that had spent 2 centuries. Trying to return to the idea of stair and then remembered it. The heat went dull and thick. The air lost its echo in one step. Naruto's thread slid along the obsidian and skittered. It didn't feel slick, it felt uninterested. He laid them deeper, into faults, into scratches where old tools had argued with stone and left a record. The map came in small, grudging sections. At the plaza's center, where a fountain's bowl would have been, lay a dish of black glass big as a roof. Wind should have skated over it. Wind refused. The bowl held sunlight without reflecting it, and the sunlight didn't argue. You could feel your breath shorten around it just because it was easier not to. Perseus was already there. He stood on the far side with 3 of his covenant who wore their madgear like pennants. He didn't pretend to own the ground. He watched the bowl with the concentration of a man who knows a thing could make him obsolete and isn't yet sure whether that is a relief. Selim leaned against a toppled pillar with a rope at her hip and a look that said boredom would be a mercy. Your monster, she said without irony. Your doctrinal failure, Anko returned cheerfully. Tamari didn't waste air on throat clearing. You came to talk, she said to Perseus. Do it walking. I came to not bury a city twice, Perseus said, and Naruto heard the discipline under the words like a metronome. We made a god to fight gods and forgot that gods do not need worship. They need hunger. Hinata's eyes were already turned inward, Byakugan open and holding. If you look at it, it takes a path inside your sight, she said, even. It doesn't bounce. It borrows. Then stop giving out loans, Tenten said, and reached into her satchel. She palmed one of the clay pellets and chucked it with the disrespect of a child on a dare. It hit the bowl and didn't bounce. It didn't sink either. It sat there like a bad idea trying to pretend it had never been made. Tenten's eyes sharpened. Okay. It eats light, and ignores weight it doesn't understand. Let's make it understand. Karen moved closer without looking over the rim, fingers measuring the air like she could take a pulse out of it. It's listening for names, she murmured. Words. Echoes. If you yell, hey, it learns what your mouth does and comes for the space in a person that answers. So no yelling. Hey, Anko said. I'd hate to lose my, hey. It's a quality syllable. Perseus gestured with 2 fingers and one of his operatives slid a mirror panel across the sand. The bowl didn't reflect it. The panel dulled in a ring where the bowl's breath reached. We call it the mouth. He said. Lazy, Tamari said, but accurate. Naruto took the shield off his back and let it settle into his hands. The weight felt honest. The hum in the rim tuned to his wrist. He didn't make a speech. He stepped to the edge and let his threads hang over the lip. The first 3 fell quietly and came back with a chill like a winter he hadn't earned. The foe. Earth found a tooth under the surface. Not a tooth, a ridge where a curve met an angle that had no business at that meeting. He held there. Hinata's voice found his shoulder. Half step, she said. Now, stop. He did. Tamari sent a flat press of wind across the bull's mouth and the air returned a sound like a hum swallowed mid-note. Tenten rolled a scatter net and eased it out with a STI. CK like a person lowering a blanket over a feral cat. Enko fed the net with one hand and tied loops with the other without looking. Karen kept 2 fingers on Naruto's pulse and one on the inside of her own elbow. Syncing rhythms like a musician stealing time from a drummer. Perseus folded a plane just enough to make a seam stand up for an instant. There, he said, and didn't step closer because why? Oh, you don't crowd a man with a shield he's in the middle of inventing. The bull breathed in. Geometry around Naruto's shins insisted that Up had a better offer somewhere else. He dug his heels and made tea. He stone under his soles remember being a path. His threads stung. The net slid, caught, and clenched as if it wanted to throw up. The bowl didn't like grit. Good. Let it not like more. It breathed in again, this time with a sound that was not sound. Naruto felt a hand he didn't own reach up through his throat to unsay his name. He clamped his teeth on it. No, he told the body he had worked hard to like. He dropped his chin so the band settled. He set the shield into the breath like you set a lid on a pan before soup boils over. The mouth's hunger ran at the metal and hit the rule Naruto had. Forged in the temple, the one that turned weapons to chalk and left hands smelling like they had done honest work. Let it swallow, Tamari said abruptly. You can't block forever. Make it choke. Tenten's hand shot out. Here, she said, and pressed a sand-gummed clay pellet to the shield's inner rim. Open it there and dump a bag of gravel down its throat. Perseus lifted his hand. Light lines G. Athered like chalk lines sketched by God with good aim. He set a plane across the bull's lip, not to reflect, to scaffold. You'll need to hold it while it coughs, he said. Hinata's fingers tightened. Naruto, she breathed. The word kissed his ear and made the part of his spine that had thought it was alone feel stupid for forgetting. Down. He dropped. The mouth's inhale took the place where his head had been and failed to pick up anything it could keep. He shoved the shield forward and forward again until the rule in the rim kissed the bowl's black, and in that heartbeat, Tenten slammed the clay pellets against the lip and cracked them with her palm. Half-dry grit poured down. Glass hates grit when it pretends to be nothing. Enko hissed a word that remembers snakes and tells them not to do what they want but what they should. She threw a smoke that wasn't smoke into the vent and the vent balked. Karen squeezed his wrist once, a reminder to choose small and constant over large and dumb. Perseus's plane held. The mouth tried to take the shield from Naruto, tried to unmake the rule that told it no. He let it try. He fed it only that. His refusal, thin and sure. He thought of the kids at the orphanage with their brooms and their stupid brave plans and gave the bowl their laughter like a handful of sand. The black glass took it and found no edge and gagged on not weapon. It coughed. The net clenched and held. The grit scratched whatever concept lived under the surface. Naruto pressed the shield in until his shoulders shook. The band wet with sweat stuck in his hair. Hinata's voice threaded him through the chaos like a needle making something of a tear. Now, hold, down. Tamari exhaled and the bull's air lost confidence. Perseus pivoted 2 planes, then a third, and the geometry that had been so sure of its angles for so long realized it didn't have a floor anymore. Karen pulled 3 heartbeats into the same pace. The bowl, Naruto, the ruin, just long enough to ache the wrong thing hear what right sounds like. The mouth turned itself inward like a man biting the inside of his cheek to stop talking. A crack spidered through the black. It didn't ring. Sound would have been a lie. The fracture spread. Not quick, not dramatic, inevitable. Tenten had another pellet ready. She didn't need it. The bowl tried to open its throat to catch itself and then failed the wah. Why a lie fails when the wrong person is told it. 1, 2, 3 more fractures, thinner than hair, and then a line like a boundary gave up. The bowl slumped, a black tongue without an argument, and came what it had always been, shaped stone. Silence happened, the kind that asks for permission to speak next and waits. Naruto pulled the shield back like he was disentangling a hand from a friend's, not a fight finished. His shoulders trembled. Karen let go of his wrist at the exact right tenth of a second so he didn't feel marionetted. Hinata's hand found his, and she didn't squeeze because she knew that every part of him hurt from insisting. She just stayed. Temari leaned on her fan as if it were a railing and looked down at the broken glass. "You're banned from Suna," she told the city, panels clacking once for punctuation. "If you try to be a god here again, I will bring a broom the size of a tower." Anko lifted her band and blinked. "We didn't lick anything," she announced. "I'm proud of us." Celine blew a strand of hair away from her mouth. "My profession becomes less profitable every hour I spend with you." Perseus stepped to the edge, looked at the bowl that couldn't be a mouth anymore. Then up across the ruin to the sky like he was filing away a paper no one should have written. "That doctrine you're building," he said to Naruto, "not unkind, feed it bread. No more sermons." Naruto found a smile in the wreckage of himself. "We'll try to cook." They climbed out without ceremony because even victories can't be grand too often or you wear out their usefulness. The carav and men were starting to feel around in their pockets for names they had always carried and now could find again. Saeed said his wife's name 3 times and laughed on the 4th. Tenten filled a la cotton bag with shards and marked it with her chalk, "Do not polish." Temari sent a hawk with a blunt report for councils who preferred to argue with nouns rather than verbs. Karen turned the broken edge of the bowl in her fingers and said quietly, "To no one, good," like a surgeon dismissing the worst of a fever. Hinata and Naruto walked the long ridge back side by side. He made himself look at the horizon unbandaged for half the trip. He didn't search for reflections. He let the sight of a line where sand met sky be a line and not an argument. Halfway home, he stopped because he was trying to find the right words and he was still a boy who sometimes tried too hard. Hinata solved it for him. She pressed her shoulder to his and kept it there. He rested his head a fraction against hers. The world didn't invert. The wind remembered how to go around them on its way to somewhere else. A good day, counted. They brought the shield into Konoha like a bucket back from a fire and slid it under his bed again. Tools need sleep. He stood a moment by the orphanage fence where he had pressed the rim and told the ivy to be plants. The ivy respected the reminder. Night returned the river its mirrors and let them be water. Somewhere steep and cold in the land of lightning, an old shrine caught a gust the wrong way and showed a lightless surface where rain should have been. It made a smaller hunger than the desert. But hunger all the same. Naruto didn't hear that. He heard children arguing about whether brooms were better than mops in a fight and Hinata's laugh answering Anko's owl impression. And Tenten swearing she could make a broom lethal from 30 paces. He leaned into the post until his threads hummed small and content and he remembered that you fight wars and then you put the tool away and eat something and you let your village be heavy in your arms for a while. The shield purred under the bed like a cat dreaming it was stone. Chapter 5 End.